221, Astartes, and Watch Sergeant Varran moved with stoic efficiency, ejecting a magazine from his bolter rifle and sticking a new one in its place with careful, yet fluid movements. He had been using this very same rifle for the better part of the last century, even learning the rudimentary techniques from an engineer to care for it when there was no tech adept of the Mechanicus nearby to do so. The movements were familiar, almost calming against the situation he and his kill team had found themselves in. Lesser men would have been terrified. The threat of impending doom, of certain death approaching, was horrifying enough, he supposed, but worse was the waiting. The absolute silence was the only thing one could hear, which was their own heartbeat, their breathing, the whirling of servos, and other internal systems in one's power armor. It was claustrophobic and dreadfully stressful, for lesser men. Varran was one of the Emperor's angels of death, as the common rabble liked to call them. Still, he was an Astartes, a space marine, the Emperor's bulwark against the unending terrors of the galaxy and beyond. He felt something that might have been fear, but he dismissed it, focused on his mission, and let it pass. He was a warrior. He had accepted the inevitability of his death long ago. He did not fear it, but nor would he give his life easily. Space Marine lives were precious, and Varran wouldn't spend a single one in vain if he could help it, including his own. Something's coming, Drax's voice warbled over the vox. I assume so, at least. There are dots, artifacts splattered across my sensors, things that would usually go unnoticed and be attributed to sensor inefficiencies and such, but we are in the void. Prepare for battle, brothers. This wave will be the most dangerous one yet. The fact that the one among them who Varran had thought physically incapable of feeling uncertain was sounding as such unnerved him, but the watch sergeant merely steeled his heart and tightened his hold on the grip of his rifle. Last stands were wasteful, and he was usually of the mind that retreat was more prudent than throwing valuable Astartes' lives away in the hope of succeeding in a mission. Sure, there were times when something had to be killed post-haste and when risks needed to be taken, but he usually preferred it when accomplishing a mission was within the capabilities of a squad sent to do it. Relying on Astartes pulling through despite the odds, every time, was not tenable in the long term. Still, statistics said Space Marines were outnumbered 99 times out of 100 when they went on a mission, though being outgunned was far less likely, but still a common occurrence. Retreat was not an option now, and neither was pulling back to a more defensible position, or escaping into the wilderness to wage guerrilla warfare upon a superior foe. Their only option was to stand and fight. All other avenues had been shut off by their foe, making use of their own gamble. Teleporting an empowered pariah on top of a psyker should have been a surefire way to kill them, no matter how strong they were. Greater demons trembled at the approach of far weaker pariahs than the one currently locked in the metal coffin floating in the middle of their formation. Varran had learned to expect the unexpected, but he didn't know how he should have foreseen this. Teleporting objects through astronomical distances without also teleporting oneself was outrageous for a psyker. Even just teleporting such distances was almost unheard of. The odds of it happening were so abysmally low that even if he had thought of the possibility, he would have dismissed it out of hand. His rifle held at the ready, lightning claws on each hand a mere thought away from activating, Varran took a long breath and let his instincts take over. These things hounding them were fast and stealthy, beyond his conscious mind's ability to detect and react to, but his instincts were finely honed over centuries of bloody warfare. His other squad made sported scars, even puncture wounds on their armor, but he alone was mostly unharmed. He had some scrapes in places where he let the beast's claws slide across ceramite, but nothing compromising his armor's functions. Tarn was stab-prone, so it wasn't a surprise that he sported a dozen puncture wounds across his body. Cassius was better off, but the old ex-ultramarine still got nicked here and there by a viciously sharp scythe in the second wave. The other two, Drac and Kier, were big, slow, and easy targets for any of the beasts that managed to get close enough despite the ridiculous firepower the Salamander and Iron Hand Marines were dishing out. Varran sank into the depths of his psyche, instincts that he had painstakingly dug out of his genocide taking the fore. His progenitor, the Primarch Corvus Corax, was well known for his distinctive ability, wraith-slipping. He had been able to go truly invisible, almost imperceptible, and if the legends were to be believed, merge with the shadows themselves. His sons had since been hard at work replicating the feat, to more or less success. Today, wraith slipping was a combination of mental discipline and martial art. The process of wraith slipping is to take advantage of one's surroundings to conceal one's presence. This was not a psychic power but rather a collection of disciplines and techniques that the Raven Guard used to conceal their visual and oral presence despite their use of power armor. Or at least, for most of them. Some managed to reach higher, get just a little bit closer to the original power wielded by the Raven Lord. Varran was one of them. He couldn't track the incoming foes, he couldn't hope to react to them, and much less keep himself out of their sights. And yet, he felt the attention of 3 separate creatures focusing on him. He couldn't describe the feeling, nor convey how he achieved it through words. He just knew they were watching, and his body moved almost by itself to shake off their attention. He couldn't go invisible or anything of the sort on his best days, but he could move silently and remain out of sight with eerie precision. He could move through an army in such a way that he remained in the blind spots of as many foes as physically possible. There was something more to it, something he had hoped to figure out before his death, but it seemed like he wouldn't live to see the task done. No matter. Rare as his level of proficiency was, there were more talented Marines of the Raven Guard around. He hadn't even been elite material. He felt one of the beast's attention slip off of him, leaving only 2. These were more intense, and he could almost feel their murderous intent aimed at him. His mouth twisted into a grim frown, reaching deeper, searching for those who had some of their attention on him. Peripheral, partial, or the like. This was vague, the numbers much less certain, but he felt there had to be at least more than 10 foes approaching. 10 or more, he said into his vox, speaking no more as he used a hint of his precious jet fuel to give himself some extra momentum. Jets of fire shot out of the ankles of his power armor, sending him crashing into the beast just as he felt its killing intent spike. His conscious mind wasn't even truly aware of what his body was doing, and yet, a lightning claw intercepted an incoming slash aiming to cut off his head, while the other let go of his rifle and jammed a hissing claw deep into the body of whatever was in front of him. He flared the power of the right claw lodged deep in the monster's body, sending a surge of electricity on a rampage through its softer interior. Then he kneed the monster in the chest, tearing his lightning claws out of its body and kicked it just so it smacked into the next foe's body. For a blissful moment, Varran felt no attention to himself. The not quite yet dead monster's body had robbed the second one of its line of sight. His rifle came up in a blink, leveled at the monsters his eyes couldn't even see, and he pulled the trigger without hesitation or even a sliver of doubt in his instincts. The recoil sent him sailing back towards the others, while the fired bolter round blasted into the stealthy monsters. Blood and gore exploded on contact, bursting forth from beneath the concealing carapace and giving him the first glimpse of the things he was fighting. They were strange creatures with a pair of arms ending in blades and a dome-like head, and without legs, as far as he could see. How they moved, he had no idea, but he was no Muggos, so he wasn't too interested in it either, beyond being disappointed that there was no obvious weak point on the body he could target. Not that it seemed like their defense would be a problem, seeing how easily his rifle and lightning claw tore through them. Hitting them was the problem. He spun to face the next foe, ready to come to the aid of his squadmates, when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Something smashed into the pariah's metal coffin from above, ejecting it out of their formation so fast he could only swipe at the place it had been moments ago, not even catching what must have been one of the cloaked beasts. Behind it trailed the chain that should have kept the thing in place, but now it was cut through cleanly, the other part of it now dangling from Drax's waist freely. The damn things must have cut it while the Marines were occupied. Drac! Varran shouted over the vox, somewhat unnecessarily as the tech Marine was already on the task of retrieving their most important tool. An arm extended towards the rapidly departing coffin, a rocket shot out of his wrist, trailing after it a heavy-duty metallic cord. The grappling hook smashed into the metal coffin in a blink, or at least it seemed like it did from Varen's perspective for a hopeful instant. Then one of the cloaked creatures dropped its camouflage, revealing itself hundreds of meters away with the grappling hook lodged into its chest. The coffin continued its flight, while the beast merely started circling them, seemingly intent on using the cord connecting it to Drac to make a nuisance of itself for the others. Which the tech marine was prevented from detaching the cord from his wrist and letting go. That might be a problem, Drac said dispassionately, watching the coffin turn into a gray dot in the distance. Varran didn't let himself despair, even knowing that the moment that Pariah's protective null field was gone, all of them would be left vulnerable to the ridiculously powerful rogue psyker. He launched himself at another beast, one embroidered in a brawl with Cassius. The ex-ultramarine had one of its scythes locked under his armpit and was in the process of pummeling the creature's head in with his fist. The watch sergeant was already in motion, intending to quickly relieve his battle brother when he saw Cassius's helmet snapping back, a dark spike the size of a human forearm sprouting from his cracked crimson visor. The creature the marine had been brawling with didn't take his foe's apparent death for granted, and with a swing of its arm, separated head from body. A vindictive fire burst to life within Baron's heart, making him lunge at the beast that cut one of his men down. He knew they were all dead. Any second now the psyker might just teleport over and make his head pop open like an overripe fruit. All he could do was make their death as costly as possible, and so he fought with a fervor he rarely showed, joining the battered Tarn in savaging as many of the monsters as possible. The next one to fall was Kier. The man was large even for space marines, but without any of Drax's mechanical enhancements that made the tech marines so durable. The latter sported a dozen spikes jutting out of his body in various places, but he moved without any apparent difficulty, while Kier's arm hung loosely by his side when a beast latched onto his chest and ran him through with both bladed arms at the same time. Varran wanted to shoot the creature in that instant, but his rifle had been the unfortunate victim of a wicked spike itself and was made into scrap metal as a result. All he was left with was his body and lightning claws, but that would have to be enough. He was a weapon, forged in the fires of battle, upon the anvil of war. As the now dead Kier used to say, he didn't need tools to kill the enemies of mankind. He fought with his instincts in charge, using his paltry stores of jet fuel sparingly as he dashed between foes, relieving whichever of his men seemed to be the next one on the chopping block. He felt like he had killed dozens of the monsters, like he had been fighting for hours upon hours. Astartes were supposed to be able to fight on for 24 hours without rest, and yet Varran felt exhaustion starting to seep into his bones, sapping the strength from his muscles and dimming the clarity of his mind. Growling inwardly while cursing his advancing age, he tried to fight it, tried to dismiss it, but then he saw the others of his group flagging too, showing clear signs of exhaustion. That immediately struck him as wrong. Tarn was more beast than man in battle, and could literally fight for days on end while his battle rage lasted. Meanwhile, Drac was more machine than man, and so he was even less likely to show signs of weariness, especially just hours after starting the fight. Something was wrong. Perhaps the spikes were laced with some slow-acting poison that insidiously crept up on them, hoping to lie beneath notice for long enough to seal their fate. Without a thought, he moved to command his power armor to flood his veins with antitoxins and combat stims that would make sure he stayed awake. It should have taken him a mere thought, a mental command to his power armor's trusty machine spirit. Instead, the mother of all headaches slammed into his mind, making his ears ring and his thoughts grind to a sudden halt. He screamed, unable to so much as think, or understand the regal, feminine voice that inexplicably whispered into his ears. "Sleep now, little raven." The headache spiked, sending a jolt through the old space marine's body as the command reverberated through his mind. It was inevitable, inescapable. His mind was strong, a fortress unto itself that had sheltered and protected his psyche from the insidious whispers of chaos and psychers alike for centuries. That same fortress evaporated in front of the power of that one simple command, like it never existed, its sheer weight obliterating all defenses a lowly space marine could have in an instant. Then, Varran, watch sergeant of the Death Watch, knew only darkness. 222, Folly. "This is sabotage," Solomon Tetrarchus murmured grimly, his icy glare aimed at nothing in particular, and yet it had the officer who had delivered the latest report freezing in place, the man's face paling slightly at his commander's tone. The virus bombs, virus torpedoes, the cyclonic torpedoes and another half a dozen varieties of exotic weaponry had gone missing in the last few minutes, seemingly without a trace. Thus, his previous plan of eradicating the orc infestation on the lower decks of his ship had fallen through before it could even be put into motion. The order had gone out, but no one could find any of the containers used to store the Life-Eater virus's pathogens. "The orcs are a distraction," Solomon growled, clutching his armrest as his anger spiked. How could this have gone unnoticed? The armory and the shrines of the Mechanicum on board that were used to store their most important weaponry should have been some of the most well-defended places on his ships, just below in priority to the bridge of each vessel. He pulled up the holodisplay of his ship, and after a query, narrowed his eyes. Out of every section that had something go missing, none had been taken over by the orcs. Someone had snuck by amidst the chaos. We have infiltrators on board. Raise the security to maximum. They must still be on board. They couldn't have escaped through the portals, not this fast. And someone get me whoever's in charge of the Astartes on a call dash. We are being hailed, sir, the communications officer shouted in confusion, cutting off Solomon mid-sentence, and for a moment Solomon shared the man's befuddlement, though he hid it better. By whom? He asked. There were no other ships in the system. The rest of his fleet wouldn't hail him since they were already in the comm network and the enemy was made up of bioships that shouldn't be capable of hailing Imperial communication systems. The signal is coming from the direction of the enemy fleet, sir, the man confirmed Solomon's suspicion, putting a deep frown on the older man's face. Put it through, he said after a moment. The holocommunicator, a massive piece of arcane technology allowing him to communicate with every captain within his fleet at once, buzzed to life, and a single figure coalesced from the storm of light it spat out. The feminine contour of their body was the first thing he noticed, but the next was a malicious grin twisting otherwise delicate lips into something ugly and mean. When he looked into the eyes of the figure, even through the hologram had no colors or true depth, he felt a shiver run down his spine and a pair of emerald green orbs deeper than the abyss interposed themselves over the hologram in his mind. Solomon clutched his armrest, gritted his teeth and commanded his body to remain still to retain some of his dignity. The figure, whom he assumed was the object of all his woes in life, the enemy he was destined to vanquish, smirked at him in apparent amusement. Blasted psychers, he hated them so very much. Freaks of nature that they were, they always unnerved him, just like Astartes with their aura of transhuman dread, but this woman was something different. Did you come to beg for mercy, freak? Solomon bit out through gritted teeth. He dearly wished it wasn't just bravado. Save your breath, you are already dead. It is only a matter of time until our fleet grinds your abominations to dust and erases your blight from the face of the galaxy. Mercy? The woman mused, tapping her lips thoughtfully as she gave him another infuriating smirk. I have no need of your mercy, Solomon Tetrarchus. No, I didn't call you to beg for mercy, quite the opposite in fact, I came to gloat. You see, I just had a date with a Deathwatch strike team who were nice enough to deliver me not one but two handy little artifacts. Aren't they nice? I didn't even feed them to my pets as thanks. They'll look nice in my collection, right next to your fancy little torpedoes. Never seen a virus bomb up close, or a PSYK out torpedo for that matter, fancy stuff, that one. Nice of you to bring one all the way over here, it's a nice gift. You truly know how to please a girl. Solomon froze for a moment, cursing up a storm inwardly while trying desperately not to show even a hint of his emotions on his face. If the widening grin on the woman's face was anything to go by, he didn't do a good enough job at it. So they failed, Solomon said neutrally, trying to sound unconcerned, and while he sort of was, it unnerved him how the woman seemingly came out unscathed from a Deathwatch strike team dropping on her head with artifacts that were chosen specifically to counter her abilities. It didn't bode well, but he wouldn't allow it to discourage him. His mission must succeed. I suppose that means we have to do this the hard way. No matter. Why was he even entertaining her? She was just dragging this out, wasting his time. He raised a hand, the command to cut the call already poised on his tongue when she spoke again. Sorry to disappoint, but no. The holographic figure grinned a smile far too wide for comfort, showing far too many teeth. Humans didn't have that many, nor did humans have pointed teeth. It means you failed. I won. You just didn't know it yet, which is why I felt the need to graciously inform you about this development, and since I am in such a good mood, I'll let you leave my star system unmolested if you hurry up and fuck right off right this instant. What do you say about it? The gloating, malicious glint in her eyes and the mean tilt of her grin told him much. She knew, somehow, she fucking knew he couldn't accept that offer even if he wanted to. His fleet was incapable of operating itself, his personnel crippled, his ships nearly dead in the water. At most, his entire fleet had a day or two more in it, and then the people on board would start to die. Dehydration, starvation, and the rest. Without navigators, leaving was assured death. No, Solomon said, scowling. We will purge your blight from this galaxy or die trying. Unfortunate, the woman mused, then shrugged. But predictable. Oh well, it's not like I thought this might end any other way. Give my regards to your emperor if you meet him, though I guess the demons will get you first. They are having a feast, you know? Such a feast you gave them, they are still gnawing on the souls of all those poor psychers you executed. On that note, what weight do your threats even have? You have no psychers, the best kill team your Astartes had is gone, along with their watch captain, and so are all your nasty little toys. All the while, orcs rampage through your ships. You are practically neutered, a fawnless kitten hoping to appear threatening by barking as loudly as it can. Solomon's blood boiled in his veins. He disregarded her words, all the fallen were now with the emperor, waiting for judgment. Even the sanctioned psychers, those freaks of nature, served the Imperium and wouldn't be allowed to feed the demons. She was lying, that's what heretics and witches did. Her words were worthless, meaningless noises, dust in the wind. Alas, the last two sentences were just the facts, the unfortunate realities of the situation he had found himself in. His options had dimmed significantly since the day his fleet left the Iron Ring. Still, pressed for options and cornered, he may be, but he was not dead yet. And while he wasn't dead, he would continue fighting. And while he continued fighting, he had a chance of being victorious. With the Emperor's grace doubtlessly on his side, these setbacks were temporary, mere hiccups. He still had his ships, he still had a fleet. An astronomical amount of money, resources, and work goes into the creation of even the smallest of warp-capable ships, so sacrificing an entire fleet just to strike a blow to a single rogue psyker would be incomprehensible to most commanders of the Navy. An outrageous waste of mankind's resources, and something that would probably end his career then and there, likely staring down the barrel of a commissar's pistol. None of that mattered. His fleet was dead, all the men and women under his command were dead, and all of his ships were destroyed. It was inevitable by this point, just a question of when, not if. There was no such thing as waste when it came to resources that were already gone. Cut the link, Solomon ordered with an icy tone, glowering at the holographic image of his fated foe. When the hologram didn't immediately wink out of existence, he slowly turned his gaze to the tech priest fiddling with the machinery beneath. The woman was still mostly organic, so Solomon could see the nervous look on her face, the tiny shakes of her hand and the growing panic in her body language. I gave you an order, what's the problem? The machine's refusing the commands, the woman said, her head swinging around to face him with a wild look in her eyes. The spirits, the machine spirits, they spurn us. Oh, Omnisia, what have we done to offend you? Solomon reached for his connection with the ship's machine spirit, using the cords jammed into the back of his head and linking his mind up to that of the machines through his brainstem. Futile, the aggravating woman, that deplorable psyker said with clear disdain, like a great predator watching its prey writhe and flail pathetically before its inevitable demise. There was no doubt in Solomon's heart that was how she viewed the current situation, and him. But no. He was no prey, he still had teeth. His mind reached for the machine spirit, aiming to command it to cut the link and engage the thrusters on full force. Even if he had to sacrifice half his fleet, he would cut through her haphazard, stolen tyrannid monstrosities. Alas, that line of thought, and all his plans along with it came to a grinding halt once more when he heard that same, aggravating voice speak directly into his mind. It's time we're done with this farce, the voice came, not from the hologram or any of the speakers. It was in his mind, coming from the machine spirit itself. How? Solomon said, his voice trembling, though he didn't know whether from terror or rage. Maybe a bit of both. You corrupted the machine spirit. I did no such thing, the machine spirit spoke into his mind, then the hologram smiled and the woman's voice resounded aloud once more. I supplanted it with myself. You have lost this fight days before you first laid eyes on my fleet. I've been told I play too much with my food, so I'll cut this short. Goodbye, you won't be missed, Solomon Tetrarchus. With that, the hologram blinked out of existence, and Solomon doubled over with his arms clutching his head as his connection to what he had thought to be the machine spirit tore apart. Dozens of alarms blared on the bridge, tech priests screaming in horror and rage, while crimson lights lit up, signifying more and more systemic failures cascading across his ship. He managed to gather himself in a few seconds, straightening his back to gaze upon the scene of chaos and panic unfolding before him, in what had been his command deck just minutes ago. These men and women, the officers at least, were seasoned and calm, but the Mechanicus personnel and the younger ones, assistants and the like, were freaking out. Honestly, Solomon couldn't fault them too much. In his heart of hearts, he too was despairing, but he was good enough at controlling himself not to show it. His thoughts were focused more upon what the woman had meant. She had been talking like she would be killing him and eliminating the problem his fleet posed in the near future, but how? The lack of a machine spirit was concerning, to say the least, but not crippling, not with his virus bomb plan having fallen through. He still had the personnel needed to operate his arsenal manually. The threat of demonic corruption infecting the machinery had just shot through the roof, but that wasn't a short-term concern, and he had no long-term concerns to speak of, since he was dead already. Order! Solomon barked, glaring down at the holodisplays showing the advancing enemy fleet as a swarm of crimson dots closing in. Throw out the tech priests who can't compose themselves. The rest of you, back to your station dash. Just as his calm, commanding voice started reasserting some semblance of order on the bridge, he caught something out of the corner of his eyes. A shimmer in the air, then a shadow fell over him, and Solomon almost fell out of his chair as suddenly there was a hunched monstrosity looming over him. It looked vaguely like a tyrannid, but was covered in a pale white carapace from head to toe. He looked into a pair of pitch-black eyes and saw nothing in them, no glee, no malice, and no hunger. It was dead as a machine, and yet it moved and breathed. Faster than any of his guards, or even his own enhanced eyesight could track, a scythe-like arm snapped out from under its shoulder and Solomon saw the room spinning around him as a sudden onset of weightlessness and nausea assaulted him. His vision darkened, giving him a last glimpse of the command deck descending into utter chaos and truth as his honor guard opened fire while the rest screamed and scrambled for shelter. All in vain as the monster moved, bisecting a dozen veteran soldiers in a blink. Then the darkness of death finally took Solomon Tetrarchus, and his severed head hit the ground. 223, Tau. I was still going over my haul from the battle while letting the orcs clean up the remaining Imperial holdouts when some of my buoys at the system's borders, outfitted with gravitational sensors, started going off. It was not the violent gravitational tsunami ships jumping out of the warp sent, more like steady ripples. Not Imperial or Eldar then, which left Tyranids and the Tau as the most likely culprits, but I quickly eliminated the former since I saw no approaching shadow in the warp. Plus, the narwhal's spatial tunneling didn't make ripples like this. Tau it is. And by the signs I'm getting, not an entire fleet, but just a single ship, maybe two. Curious. Did the ones who fled come back, or maybe they sent back an envoy to greet the supposedly victorious Imperials and parley with them? Maybe scouts? There was little use in thinking more about it when I could just go and check for myself, even if that meant leaving behind my latest flight of fancy, a gene-editing virus that would target only a group of humans possessing a very specific sequence of genes, to bring about an even more specific list of mutations. That was a lot of words to say. I got my hands on a few felinids from the lower decks of the Imperial ships, feline abhumans, and that they were so goddamn ugly I instantly went about making a virus that would mutate all of them into a much more pleasing to the eye state. That is, into proper catgirls and boys. Really, baseline felinids looked like someone took a shaved cat and an ugly human, threw them in a blender along with a handful of shit, then took the result and gave it life. Safe to say, they were ugly as sin and disgusting, which was a travesty to my catgirl-loving sensibilities. Changing how a single one looked would be simple enough, but the perfectionist in me couldn't let go of the idea of making a virus that would do the same for all felinids it infected on a galactic scale. And once I had the gene-editing virus for that, it would be simplicity itself to use it as a baseline for other stuff. I could use it to spread beneficial gene therapy among my citizens, eliminating genetic defects and other issues stemming from genetic issues. Hell, I could probably use it to spread a mutation that would extend their lifespans to a few thousand years with a little time investment. But that would be work, unlike making proper catgirls, which was distinctly in the fun category, and I had more important things to work on in my work hours. Work-life balance is important. First of which was, as of now, checking out who the hell was bothering me now. My experiments and other work could wait, nothing was especially pressing, and all my surviving test subjects were in a deep, medically induced coma, including the handfuls of Deathwatch Astartes I had grabbed along with the few surviving pariahs I managed to capture. That one fucker the teleporting kill team had been dragging around in a coffin had been a damned pain to keep alive, but I had kinda managed it, for now. I couldn't check on his soul, it was the center of the most powerful null field I had ever seen, so that only left me with non-psychic options, which were dreadfully inadequate for healing the kind of soul damage I suspected the guy to be suffering from. Still, while he lasted, it would be good training to try and maintain my telepathic links closer and closer to the source. Anyway, back to my newest set of interlopers. Celine was off handling the Senate and handing out salvage rights to the arcologies for some of the Imperial ships we had captured. Not all, since I wanted to keep some and leave some as bargaining chips for my Tau friends. As for why I even gave salvage rights to my arcologies? Well, partly to give the rookie scientists something to do and, more importantly, to drive home the fact that the Imperium was real. Nothing quite like a massive Imperial battle cruiser to banish all doubts about that, and the truthfulness of my previous claims about protecting them from this threat. Of course, I had grabbed everything too dangerous from them all, including all the big no-no weaponry and warp drives, plus the Geller field generators. There were still a bunch of technologies my new little scientists could gnaw upon, though, so they shouldn't be too unhappy to only be getting the scraps. I shot off a message to my partner about my intention, then, when she gave me a telekinetic shrug, I chain-blinked over to the approaching ship. This was no invading fleet, and nor did it prove much of a threat with it being a Tau ship, so I didn't feel the need to kick up a fuss about it like I had with the Imperial fleet. Which proved prudent as I recognized the ship the moment I appeared about 1,000,000 kilometers away from it, just to be safe, and had it within range of my organic visual sensors. That is, my eyes, if it wasn't obvious. Though they only resembled a pair of human eyeballs visually, with every last cell making up the organs having gone through thorough upgrades. Which was why I could see the ship from this far away in real time, as in, without having to wait for the sluggish light reflected off its hull to crawl its way over to me, which would take all of 3 to 4 seconds at this distance, and with crystal clear clarity. It was Ansal's ship, who was the ethereal I had been negotiating with just a few weeks ago about my relationship with his empire and its nature. It seemed like he had turned back somewhere along the way to his destination because I was rather sure Tau ships couldn't do an entire back and forth between Valia and their regional capital of Tsuamalar in this short of a timeframe. Again, the Tau ship that I'd sent away when the Imperial fleet arrived came to mind, and I wondered whether the two ships had somehow met. But no, the latter had to have caught up with the Ethereal's flagship, which was a dubious proposition at best, so Coldstone must he turned the vessel around for one reason or another. I debated blinking back and continuing to play pretend with him, downplaying my abilities, but in the end, I just shrugged and decided not to go through with it. There was no point to it. The other Tau ship had seen me teleport onto the bridge and would doubtlessly report my capabilities to the Ethereals at the first opportunity. Furthermore, I'd have to come up with an excuse for how exactly I managed to decimate an entire Imperial fleet all on my lonesome, beyond the borders of my system. There would be questions, and a lot of them. The timeline wouldn't match up at all if I continued to hide my teleporting capabilities. They would think I had a fleet hidden in the asteroid field at best, ready to meet the invading fleet, and at worst, they'd come up with some outrageous tale which would cause them to break contact with me, if my usual luck held out. Honestly, with my luck being what it tended to be, I found myself lucky that no greater demons took the Imperial fleet's invasion as an open invitation to party. Throughout this debacle, a part of me had been expecting to see some asshole tear real space apart to crawl out and make a nuisance of themselves. I doubted Kabunda took the result of our fight particularly well, for instance. The fact that no demons appeared all this time was worrying by itself. Was my makeshift shadow in the warp that good, or were they just lulling me into a false sense of safety before striking when I least expected it? Gork and Mork teleported the Imperial fleet on the border of the system, beyond the reach of the shadow I had made. That has to mean something. I doubt it was out of care or some messed up sense of propriety. As things stood, my abilities would get out one way or the other, and it was much better to own them than scurry about and hide. The latter would make the ethereal think I feared discovery, that I had something to fear from him, which wasn't the image I wanted to project. I had a more cohesive idea of the war and the geopolitics of the Jericho sector now that I had gone mind-diving into a few higher-ranked Imperial officers, especially Solomon. The Tau September that Ounsal represented was isolated and near autonomous, governed entirely separately from the Tau Empire itself. Meaning, they didn't have the massive backing of resources, manpower and such that I had initially assumed they did. I had thought I could at best show myself to be useful to the Tau Empire, but if this September was truly as isolated as I had been led to believe, I could be crucial to their success in this region. I could go from useful but disposable and risky to keep around to a crucial part of our war effort. With both the First Fleet and the Supreme Commander of the entire Achilles Crusade now gone, the Tau could advance and finally advance the Grey Hell front. If they agreed to my, well, let's call them what they are, demands, then I'd make sure they not only advanced but pushed the Imperium out of the Reach entirely. If we could capture the warp gate they used to travel here, then the Reach was as good as ours. Ignoring the other slumbering problems scattered across the region of ours, problems which my mind reading of the few Deathwatch members I managed to break the mind of made me distressingly aware of. Before all that, though, I had to make sure there even was an us and not just a me and them. I'd prefer to keep cordial with the Tau, but it still wasn't a must, especially now that I knew that their resources were less than I had first assumed, the same with the danger they posed. Well then, all that was left was to go ahead with this plan, if it could even be called that. A show of force first, then some cordiality to show that said force won't be used against them, unprovoked, at least. I didn't want my would-be allies to panic and do something regrettable. I blinked closer to the ship, floating in the depthless, endless void of the space between star systems. The lone vessel before me was the closest piece of solid matter, aside from a few dust particles here and there and the thin cloud of lesser atoms floating invisibly around me. The Tau ship and I, alone in the interstellar space, with the closest other object being a fist-sized chunk of some ancient asteroid about 2 light-seconds behind me. Space was empty. Even with all the life, wonders and horrors I knew to inhabit it, space was empty and lifeless to the extreme, when measured by sheer volume. If someone set off in a straight line, for example, never correcting course, they might never hit anything at all within the bounds of the observable universe. Not in our galaxy, nor in any other. Though that calculation failed to take into account the dubious existence of fate and other more malign entities guiding anyone dumb enough to just set off on a lonely voyage through space. I doubted they would last more than a few years before some horror crawled out of the immaterium to nibble on their bones. With that happy thought in mind, I waited to be noticed, my aura draped over the minds of the Tau manning the spaceship's bridge, listening for their surface thoughts. It took them a few seconds, nearly 10, before one of the sensor operators pointed out my existence, though only after the poor girl cleared her eyes twice and made the sensor double-check the information. I guess some random person floating in interstellar space, supposedly alive by their heat signature, was rather unusual. I waited a whole minute, even moving around enough for their sensors to pick up to show that I was alive, just letting them get used to the idea of there being someone out here, alive and active, obviously present for them. Because why else would I be floating in the way of their ship with all this space around? They gathered themselves, woke the sleeping captain, who took over from his second and even sent a runner to notify the ethereal on board in case this was a first contact situation. Then, when I felt Ounsal closing in on the bridge, mere seconds away from stepping onto the command deck, I smiled disarmingly and blinked there. One moment, I stood 1,000 kilometers away, floating in the void. The second, I stood on the bridge of the Tau vessel, bypassing all of their rudimentary shields and protections with laughable ease. In truth, they didn't even obstruct my teleportation at all, being entirely focused on stopping more physical threats, and not ones of the psychic nature. Of course, the pair of guards standing by the gate, guarding the entrance to the bridge, noticed me first and didn't bother waiting before unloading a pair of crackling blue bolts of energy at me. I raised an eyebrow, humming in interest when they splattered across the psychic shield floating a centimeter above my skin. Electric, instead of plasma or laser, and non-lethal bolts, too. Consider it. In response, I raised my hands in a placating gesture, mirroring the universal sign of surrender with a smile on my face, and spoke the words no human probably said to an alien in many millennia: I come in peace. That earned me a few moments, calming the panic and chaos that was descending upon the rest of the bridge's inhabitants, who were quickly scrambling to either get away from me or to line up their quickly drawn sidearms to fire at me. None did, though, and neither did any of them get to speak a word before the gate hissed open, revealing the regal ethereal whom I hadn't seen in some time striding in with his hands clasped behind his back. He beheld the scene of chaos and looked at me a moment later. His gaze was evaluating, calculating, and more than a bit wary, but he seemed to feel the thick tension hanging in the air and seemed to sigh, though it was merely a mental thing, as none of it showed on his composed features. At ease, Ounsal said calmly, gesturing with a wave of his hands for the guards to lower their weapons, which they did. The rest of the crew quickly followed suit, though the air cast were a bit slower to obey than the well-trained fire cast. Such close contact with a possible enemy probably unnerved them. Just who we were coming to meet, though sooner and farther away from the site of our last meeting than expected. I heard your earlier words, and in favor of the sentiment, let us take this meeting to a more comfortable setting. Care for some tea? That sounds splendid, I said, unconsciously channeling my inner posh English lady as I spoke in a posh British accent. Not that it would look out of place. Almost everyone I'd met in the Imperium had a posh English accent, something I blamed on the fact that Games Workshop, the company that made Warhammer 40k, was very British. Lead the way, my good sir. It seems my presence might have caused some stress on these poor fellows. Let us take this matter elsewhere, then. I'm in the mood for some tea. That was probably too much. I mused inwardly, none of my inner cringing showing on my face, my smile still in place as I strutted after Ounsal, who had easily begun leading me away from the jumpy Tau and towards a nearby conference room. Oh well, at worst, Celine is laughing herself silly if she's watching what I'm doing through our bond. Not the worst thing that could happen. Entertaining the not yet wife is a goal I can get behind, even at the cost of suffering from cringe. If the faint traces of amusement leaking through our bond were anything to go by, I had succeeded, at least somewhat. Yay? 224, Jewel. I took a delicate sip of the strange, pink tea I'd been served and couldn't help but hum in appreciation at the sweet, floral taste that spread through my mouth. It was almost like spring distilled into liquid and poured out into a cup, quite refreshing. You have been hiding much of your strength, it seems, Ounsal said, direct but not accusatory. A mere statement of fact, and I nodded easily. It's not merely that artifact of yours that's special about you, is it? Or perhaps do you have another ancient relic stashed away in a sleeve that allows for teleportation and survival in the void? No, I said, taking another slow sip. It's all me. I believe I'm what the Imperium would dub an Alpha Plus Psyker, though that term is much too reductive and vague to describe me fully. But it will have to for now. A girl had to have her secrets, even if some are forced into the light. I'd say they still linger at the edge of shadows, he said. Would you care to push them fully into the light? Specify what exactly you have been hiding that you do not see a reason to anymore. Beyond teleporting? I asked, raising an eyebrow in amusement. I'm sure you'd love the details, but I'll give you a demonstration later and allow you to draw your conclusions from it. But that wasn't why I came all the way here. You are not my first visitor, and the others weren't so courteous in greeting me with a cup of tea. Not at all, and in their rudeness, they forced me to reveal more about myself than I had intended. These are things that I'm sure you would have discovered in time, as a result, if not instantly, when you entered the system. Thus, I see no reason to hide them anymore, as I said before. Visitors? Ounsal asked, his facade of calm amiability falling away to reveal what lay beneath. His face warped into a picture of seriousness, eyes glinting with something grim. That's why you turned back, isn't it? I mused, my supernaturally sped-up mind connecting the dots between heartbeats. You heard of their departure on your way back to Tsuamalar. His usual impregnable fortress of a mind cracked ever so slightly, letting a sliver of panic escape through it before he clamped down on it and repaired the flaw. You have come across Imperial vessels, have you not? He asked seriously. That's too fast, even with their warp drives, it should have taken them months to reach here. A scouting squadron, perhaps, sent ahead of the main fleet? It was obvious he was merely thinking aloud, a rare lapse of control for the usually composed ethereal. Did the coming of the Imperial fleet truly disturb him that much? Well, I suppose a single fleet under that Count of Bongrave had been holding the line against the Tau for centuries single-handedly. There was a real cause for worry. I doubt they expected to arrive early, I said, watching him with a hint of gleeful fascination. It was a bit sadistic of me, taking amusement in his stress and near panicking, but I never claimed to be perfect. All their navigators practically combusted on arrival, quickly followed by nearly all of their psychers having a collective meltdown which ended with the Lord Militant purging them to the last. Now that caught his attention, and I could almost feel all the various thoughts scrambling around in his head, vying for attention, reorienting like a pack of starving dogs smelling fresh meat. How do you know that? He asked, half suspicion, half disbelief. Was I lying? Was I telling the truth? How could I know that, if I were? How did I survive learning it? One does not merely stroll into the flagship of an Imperial fleet and ask for a status report. I could see it in his eyes when the surprise gave way, and he started leaning towards doubt. There was no way a single psyker, no matter how powerful, could win against a fleet, right? He would also know how hard it would be to infiltrate a flagship on high alert. I think it is time for my demonstration, I said, my lips curling into a smile. Your slip drive, or whatever you're calling it, is dreadfully slow. Let me speed it up a bit. Wait, wadash, he didn't get to finish the sentence as I wrapped my power around the ship and blinked it in its entirety right onto the border of the Valius system. It also just happened that I had put it down just so it got a direct line of sight on the now dead Imperial fleet floating listlessly in the void. Ugh. What have you done? He wobbled in his seat, swallowing thickly as he stumbled to his feet despite the transition having gone off without a hitch. It was practically seamless, but apparently I still had ways to go. Maybe being able to teleport a handful of people at once without making them feel sick had made my head big. Maybe the next step shouldn't have been attempting to do the same with a whole-ass ship with thousands of people on board. Oh well. They could handle it. I just smiled mysteriously, but as he opened his mouth to respond, likely with another demand for answers, the door burst open and a harried-looking Tau spacer stumbled in. Honorable Aun, the man gasped, swaying unsteadily at his feet. Whoops, I may have thrown their sense of balance for a spin, the inner ear was so damned sensitive. We've moved near our destination. Sensors detect upwards of 70 Imperial void ships in our vicinity. Your counsel is direly needed. Ounsal turned to me, suspicion and a rising sense of betrayal in his eyes. Dead ships, I said, correcting the Tau who probably ran off to get the ethereal before even a full sensor reading could be made. Space hulks and metal carcasses. It's a graveyard for ships, not a threat to you, not anymore. The Tau just stared at me for a long moment, which prompted me to sigh and rise to my feet. I moved towards the door, gesturing for them to follow. Come, I said over my shoulder. See it with your own eyes. Once you believe me, we can go from there. Now, where was that bridge again? I could have easily found my way, but the question startled the Tau spacer into action and rushed to lead the way. Ounsal rose to follow along, stepping beside me as we navigated the futuristic corridors of the Tau vessel. We stepped onto the bridge a minute later and retreated to a site of organized chaos as the officers shouted the newest reports and sensor readings at the captain, who held his composure admirably well despite having had his ship thrown through space by a whimsical eldritch horror. Their engines are dead, sir, one Tau shouted. The thrusters still carry heat, but it's just lingering without being able to radiate it away. They haven't had power for hours, if not days. Shields are offline, another said. They are dead in the water. No shields, no thrusters. Just hunks of metal. Search for life signs, the captain commanded. Without their shields, we should be able to scan the ships in full. There is barely anything, sir. A Tau piped up a moment later. Only a few dozen per ship, and most of them don't seem fully human. Mutants, perhaps? That would be correct, I said, not loud enough for the bridge crew to hear but within earshot of Ansal. The life support systems are offline, and the atmosphere has been vented into space. You won't find anything on them aside from a few mutants hiding in the depths of the lower decks that are surviving even with the lack of air. Not that they'll last long without food or water. Though now that I was scanning the ships more thoroughly, focusing on the few surviving mutants, I could see pockets of air lingering in the archaic lower decks where vents and corridors had been welded shut long ago. You've done this? Ansal asked, disbelieving but with much less doubt in his voice than before. The evidence was right before his eyes, after all. Not by myself, I said, my lips curling into a smirk. And not under my own power, but yes. It was done under my command. Technically, it was done by my fleets and drones, which I would continue to claim were made by the artifact I had fused with the moon of Valia Prime and my own body. It wasn't even a lie, if you squint really hard. It was more believable than the truth at least, which was the purpose. The ethereal stood there, silent, thoughtful. He listened to the shouted reports, his eyes fixed on the dead fleet of the Imperium spread out before him. Then he nodded, seemingly to himself, and turned his gaze upon me. Why? He asked, and I tilted my head. Why indeed? Such a loaded question packed into a single word. He knew the how, or at least thought he did, but not the why. If I could do this, why play diplomacy with him? Why pretend? Why come to him? Why teleport his ship? Perhaps he even wondered why I'd let him live, where almost any other human with my power would have killed him and his men, then taken from them what they wanted. Why didn't I? What were my intentions? What game was I playing? I could taste the confusion, the swirling thoughts rolling around in the chaos of his head, the crashing waves of his thoughts causing ripples upon the surface of his mind. Because even with all this power, being alone in this wide, dangerous galaxy is not a good place to be, I said, shrugging. I need allies. Even with the Lord Militant dead, the First Fleet gone and the Achilles Crusade likely in disarray, I can't capitalize on it. Not really. But you can. An alliance, Ansal tasted the word thoughtfully. Previously, we had been talking about me becoming a vassal of the Tau Empire, or a mercenary auxiliary at best. An alliance was different, though, leaning more towards a bond of equals. And what would you want out of this alliance? Information, resources, knowledge, I said easily. And military cooperation. I can hit hard and fast, but I don't have the manpower to hold any planets I might conquer. I'm having my hands full with a single moon. I wouldn't bother capitalizing on the Imperium's confusion in the Reach by myself, but if this alliance goes through, we can push them out of the region and claim their warp gate for our own. I'm certain we can work something out that will be mutually beneficial to both of our sides, Ansal said, maybe just a little too quickly not to seem desperate. His tone was level and his face placid, but he already implicitly agreed to the alliance I proposed without a word. This will change things. Can you project power further away from your moon? I could, I said. The bioships making up my fleet are tied to me, not the moon itself. Wherever I go, they can follow. But leaving my moon would place it in danger, so it couldn't be done on a whim, or for long. There are already sharks circling, sniffing for any trace of blood in the water, and I refused to give them an opening. He gave me a strange glance, not understanding my implications, but let it go and nodded. If the Tau turned out to truly go along with this alliance, and the spirit of it too, I would have to educate them a bit. Of the Imperium, the warp, demons, chaos, and the rest. I can't have my allies be a bunch of ignorant bumpkins floundering their way through every conflict, not understanding what they face. But not yet. Ansal would likely make a provisional agreement with me, but he was an envoy at best. I doubted he could make the sort of deal I wanted to make with the Velcon September. For one, I wanted the Valius system. All of it, not just the single measly moon they gave me. but that was just the start. There were many more specific details of our alliance that would have to be ironed out. I wanted Earth-caste scientists on my moon, working on projects I gave them. I wanted access to Tau technology, and not just the scraps they gave me. I also wanted a share of the spoils from the wars to come, in one form or the other. Ansal was only all too happy to agree with the majority of my demands, only pushing back on the specifics. Numbers, shares, that sort of thing. And of course, he wanted the ability to call on me basically on demand for his September. I told him I could agree to being called on every so often. Once per 5 years, for example. He whined and pulled his leg, but agreed in the end when I said that didn't mean I wouldn't go along with their plans more, just that they had to convince me any other time on a case-by-case basis. By the time he turned his ship around, heading back to convey what happened here to the other ethereals at Suamalar, I had it confirmed that the entire Valius system was now officially mine. No more babysitters, nosy Tau captains making a nuisance of themselves in my backyard, and no more need to sneak about when I wanted to explore Valia itself. Now it was time to finally beat that strange spirit governing every living being on Valia into submission and kick my other projects into next gear. Without the need to fly under the Tau's radar, I could turn my Dyson swarm into a true swarm from the few hundred satellites it was at the moment. Same with my fleet, listening stations, sensor buoys, and my mining operations in the asteroid fields. I wasn't sure whether I'd keep Valia as the center of my power base forever, but it was the first system I ruled over, so it would always have a special place in my heart. And it was finally time to begin turning into something worth being proud of, a jewel of my empire to be. 225, upgrades people, upgrades, again, 'cause I ran out of title ideas. I got started on turning my hasty plans and half-formed ideas from the day before into reality the next morning. Why did I wait till the next morning? None of your business. But if you must know, I was busy celebrating my victory with my lovely girlfriend. How many of you little beauties can I make before it starts causing problems, I wonder? I mused aloud, watching the latest heat-transforming satellite be spat out of my space factory. I gently guided the latest member of the Dyson swarm surrounding the local star into its proper place, then sent it off on its orbit. It wouldn't do to shroud the star in so much junk that I start a new ice age on my 2 habitable planets. A quick prompt to my mind core sent me back an answer. Not a solid one, I didn't dedicate enough processing power to the prompt to get that, but an answer nonetheless. You don't have enough bioenergy to have to worry about that. Rude, but helpful. So I could use all my stored bioenergy to spit out as many satellites as possible, and it still wouldn't dim the star's luminosity in any substantial way. Good to know. Now that the Tau had their noses firmly stuck in someone else's business and not my own, I could do away with the Dyson swarm idea entirely and build a proper Dyson sphere. Alas, that would 100% kill every living thing in the system that needed light and heat to survive, which even included orcs. Furthermore, a Dyson sphere might not even be the most efficient way to harvest bioenergy from a star. My satellites converted light and radiation at the moment, barely catching even the slightest fraction of the star's heat from their high orbit. Unfortunately, while I could make heat-converting spikes that could withstand the temperatures present near the molten mantle of Valia Prime, a star's surface temperature would melt them to worthless slag in moments. Maybe that was a better avenue to pursue, trying to directly siphon away the very heat of the star. It would take some iterative experimenting to develop new prototype heat harvester spikes that I could throw into the star. Newer and newer models could sink deeper, withstanding greater pressure and temperatures for more gains, though perhaps there was an upper limit on how much heat they could absorb, or how much bioenergy they could store. It was worth a try either way. It wasn't like setting a few dozen mind cores on the task was that much of a hassle. Plus, they would produce blueprints with high resistance to extreme pressure and heat, which I could use in other designs even if this idea proved to be a dead end. And I can always build a Dyson sphere around a star in a neighboring, uninhabited system. For now, the swarm would do. The satellites I already had orbiting the sun had gathered quite a sizable sum in bioenergy over the past few weeks. Instead of taking that for myself for my other projects, I reinvested it all into kicking the swarm production into next gear. The result was the autonomous factory before me. It flew in a very high orbit, far enough from the sun to escape the majority of its heat and lessen the radiation to a manageable level. Sure, I covered the outsides in the same heat-absorbing carapace, but the insides were more vulnerable. It was, in essence, the brood mother of my organic swarm of satellites. I set up a system where every satellite would dump all bioenergy they'd gathered in the factory when they flew close. That way, the swarm would grow with minimal assistance from me. Just in case, I also left a smaller swarm of drones meant for combat stuck to the dark side of the factory. Those should be enough to deal with errant asteroids, pirates, or some adventurous voidborn fauna. Not that I felt anything of the sort in the system, but it was good practice to prepare for the future. Once I had more than a single system under my command, I couldn't rely on my aura to keep track of everything. I would also get overwhelmed if I had to solve every problem myself. There were a lot of kinks and problems with my plans that needed ironing out, but that was just life. For one, I would have to decide whether I relied on artificial minds I made and implanted into my version of the tyrannid synapse creatures, or if I was willing to give command over some of my drones to trustworthy people. I could personally make sure of people's trustworthiness at first, but it would spiral out of control. That was not a plan that I would be able to maintain as the systems I needed to protect grew in number. So many problems. Everything had pros and cons, and no truly good options presented themselves. Drawbacks were everywhere. Humans could be corrupted, bribed, swayed, or threatened into blackmailing me. Drones with artificial minds, though, could be corrupted in an altogether different way. Without souls, or souls so small that even I barely felt them, they would be unable to resist demonic subversion. Although Tau could hide from their attention with their flimsy soul, that wouldn't be a viable option for me. I had a hunch that demons would go out of their way to corrupt them if I went with that plan, even if it proved troublesome for them to track down a nearly soulless organic automaton. I could build backdoors for myself, implant a virus into humans in my service that would kill them when it came into contact with the taint of chaos. But backdoors could be found by others and exploited, and the same went for the latter idea. Demons would just poke my people with a bit of taint, and they'd fall over dead. Doesn't matter for now. I should focus on fortifying the Valia system first, making sure my citizens are doing okay, take control of Valia itself and prepare my fleet for war. If Coldstone's predictions were to be believed, he would return from Suamalar with a fleet at his back, ready to break through the Grey Hell front after centuries of stagnant warfare, and he wanted me by his side with the best fleet I could make at my command. As per our agreement. If he could get the ethereal council of his September to agree to my demands, he would get it too. I made some final additions to the factory, an alabaster tendril extended from my hand and plunged into the massive structure. It was the size of a skyscraper, hundreds of house-sized satellites growing within at any one time. I considered giving it a core of eldritch flesh to speed up the production, but thought better of it. I wanted to leave as little of the miracle material that gave me my greatest strength just lying about as I could. The production didn't need to be that fast either. Slow and steady would do for my purposes. The space factory's surface rippled, the end of its morphing a bit as the structure upgraded to my latest, and hopefully finalized model. With this latest addition, it wouldn't need me to calculate the satellite's orbiting trajectory, and it could also handle launching them on said optimal trajectory itself. Automated, clean, efficient. With that handled, I jumped into handling the next bullet point on the top of my to-do list, upgrading security. I had gravitational sensor buoys here and there, spread out across the system, with some larger ones in the asteroid clouds surrounding the system, but both their numbers and size was low due to the need for secrecy from before. I didn't remove any of the sneakier sensors. They would have their own purpose to serve as a second layer of defense in case someone managed to evade the more obvious sensor arrays I was about to build. The blueprint was ready, so I just had to implement it. In a way, these were almost simpler than the stealth buoys, since they housed regular-sized gravity sensors, not the miniature ones. Narwhals were slimmer than regular tyrannid bioships, but they were still monolithic creatures, and the gravity sensors were their most intricate organs. I just took my slightly improved sensor design and put it in spheres of hardened carapace, which would both protect it and sustain it. I made 2 telepathic networks, threading the stealth buoys into one and the larger, new sensors into another, then thought better of it and split both networks into 3 separate ones. Redundancy and fragmentation would make subverting the network much harder, even if I wasn't sure whether anyone in this galaxy could do so. Who was I kidding? There had to be. I also made them all connect to a slew of organic computers back in the fortress on Valia Prime, where Alpha could assign someone trustworthy to watch over them for any sign of an invader, even while I was off beating up Imperials with the Tau. In the end, I made 360 of my new sensor spheres that I spread out across the outer asteroid field. Another 36 that I had orbiting the star and the smaller asteroid cloud between the third and fourth planets of the system. Aside from these, I had thousands of the smaller stealth buoys. That should be enough of an early warning system. With these, nothing should be able to approach the Valia system without me knowing. Well, in a normal way at least. The shadow and the warp would make an approach from the immaterium much harder, but I didn't believe it made it impossible. I would be hard-pressed to find anything I could confidently say was absolutely impossible in this mad galaxy. Nowhere would be truly safe, nothing was foolproof, and nobody was undefeatable. This was a galaxy where gods died by the dozens, and were enslaved by the very people whom they themselves had enslaved not long before. The best I could do was good enough. The most I could do was hope that it would be enough. Well, that's a depressing thought, I murmured, suppressing a sigh. Honestly, if I wasn't a fundamentally psychic creature, I would have likely thrown my weight behind the Silent King's Pariah Nexus project. Putting the entire galaxy under a powerful null field would make nearly all psychic problems evaporate instantly, but it would also make my life a living hell, and leave the many predators of the warp with only a single source of new prey, my shiny little realm floating just out of their reach. Nope. That Pariah Nexus couldn't be finished, and I had to make sure it never got completed. From what I remembered, it should be disrupted and fail, or something similar, but who knew whether I had butterflied that particular event in the wrong direction with my actions up until now? After chasing the Imperium out of the Jericho Reach, or at least making sure that my Tau allies can curb stop what remains of them, I had time. The Pariah Nexus was an event that happened after the Plague Wars. A few years at least. Though it would probably be smart to find a way of tapping into the news from the happenings of the wider Imperium. Could I co-opt an Inquisitor to get access to their networks? Maybe one of the watch fortresses of the Death Watch has access, and I could listen in on the news. Now those were plans for the near future. The Death Watch had strongholds across the Reach, and they wouldn't take the Achilles Crusade's collapse, or the Imperium's retreat from the region lying down. Upgrading my mining operations came next. I had some autonomous drones harvesting and collecting valuable ores and minerals from asteroids, and I also had a few harvesting stations in low orbit around the fifth planet from the Sun, a gas giant, gathering valuable rocket fuel. It wasn't good quality, but it was promethium, the fuel the Imperium used for the vast majority of their vehicles and ships. Though from what I knew of the stuff from Zeta's infodump, I knew promethium did not refer to a single substance. It was a catch-all term the Imperium used for all combustible fuel, and they didn't even differentiate it from the promethium bombs that were basically just super napalm. The Mechanicus itself had an internal classification system where they gave each variation of promethium a specific, extremely boring codename. The stuff I could make was mediocre at best, but barely even that. In the Imperium, it wouldn't hold up to military standards and would only be used in civilian vessels and vehicles. Warships had to make the best choice when it came to the volume-to-power ratio of their fuel. Sadly, it wasn't even my fault that it was so bad. The gas giant simply didn't have the materials for any of the better promethium variants. Maybe in another system I'll find a better source. My mind cores were still working on incorporating all the ideas I had about improving my fleet during the battle into a new design. It was an iterative process, like always, so it would take time to reach an optimal design I could proudly use in my fleet when I sailed out again. I checked on my citizens quickly, going through the arcologies with my aura, and found they were fine, surprisingly enough. I had driven a pair of Imperial light cruisers into low orbit after all, then broke one of them apart and handed out the parts to every arcology for examination. They could harvest them for materials, reverse engineer the technology, or just put them in museums. I didn't care overly much. I just wanted to give them tangible proof of my words. Speaking of tangible proof, I thought back to my latest passion project, de-uglifying the felinids, or Project Catgirls as my sassy mindcore assistant dubbed it. I wasn't sure what to do with my living prisoners, so I just sorta put them on ice for now. The Astartes, Pisker, and the Mechanicus prisoners could remain in their medically induced coma. I made sure their bodies wouldn't decay or age, so I could keep them in that limbo for as long as I had the bioenergy to sustain it. But the Felinids? They didn't do anything to me. They didn't even know the ships they had been living in were attacking me. Those mutants were born, raised, and would have died in the bowels of those ancient ships. I could release them into the arcologies, let them speak of their horrid lives to my sheltered human citizens. I thought, idly tapping my chin. But what to do with them? They were sterile at the moment, as I didn't want them to have the ability to reproduce while their genes were such a chaos-tainted mess. I had fixed that up over the process of my experiments, but, do I keep them sterile? Do I make them able to interbreed with regular humans? Do I make their genes so strong that if either parent of a child is a Felinid, then the child too would be one, instead of a half-breed? Half-breeds were not something I was willing to allow. The two alien genes mixing would not be able to fully meld, leaving the children more vulnerable to further mutations or worse, chaos corruption. Chaos loved to seep into such gaps and force chaos-based mutations. Many mutant groups that had once been considered subhumans were now hunted by the Inquisition, and loath I am to agree with them on something, they had the right of it. I had a beast man among my prisoners, and his genes were 30% chaos-infected warp stuff. Coin flip method then? 50-50 that the child will be either fully human or fully Felinid when they interbreed? That might give rise to genetic deficiencies though, since the child would practically be a clone of the luckier parent. Maybe I could load more genetic information into their DNA? Give it an ancestral library it could draw from when a child is conceived? Now that I hadn't the faintest idea how to do. I frowned, but decided to postpone the problem for the future. For now, I would give the Felinids back their fertility, but I would also make them incompatible with non-Felinids. I could split them apart between the arcologies, but I only had a few hundred of them, barely enough to fill a tiny village. No, that would be cruel, especially since the majority of them had been living together on one of the ships in a tribalistic manner, surviving among the other mutant groups in the bowels of a void ship. I could also clone them and send a group to each arcology to give my citizens much-needed perspective on what the Imperium from the inside, but that, too, I felt, would be cruel in a way. Sooner or later, the arcologies would start to communicate, perhaps even travel between them would be established, and the Felinids would figure out that every last one of them had 50 clones running around on the planet. Plus, that might work against me. Clones might be doubted, and I wasn't sure how my citizens would react to them. I'll make an enclave for these Felinids to live in one of the arcologies. Alpha will find one that has a more open-minded population and would be best to settle them in. 226, Surprise Visit. My plans were made, and everything I had to do in the Valia system was proceeding smoothly. Only checking up on Valia itself was left on my to-do list. Still, I didn't think that would be much of an obstacle at all. I had felt the spirit of the planet during my short, sneaky visit there a few weeks ago, and it wasn't powerful enough to give me trouble. Everything was in order and proceeding well. Soon, I could head out and give myself and our new allies some more breathing room. Without any custodes or the like, that too didn't seem like all that troublesome. Maybe the Death Watch would get in the way, maybe the Imperial Navy would resist and flail, but they wouldn't be a true risk. Of course, my life couldn't be that simple. As they say, man plans, and God laughs. In this case, I blamed the rotting skeleton, styling himself the God Emperor of mankind. My shadow in the warp worked against me. It wasn't really my shadow, it was entirely made by the Tyranids I kept bound and spread out across the system, so while it shielded me from the warp, it also clouded my vision of the deeper warp. I could see demons mucking about near the surface, but the waters were deep, murky, and unknowable beyond a point. Which is why I only noticed something emerging from the depths of the warp, bubbling towards the surface, mere moments before I felt the veil separating real space from the immaterium ripple. I knew that, technically, the shadow was no foolproof, nor an impregnable shield. Still, I also knew that it made even greater demons unable to pass through the veil, or even just poke through and influence real space. I wrote off the chance of anyone coming through it as extremely unlikely, even if my paranoia urged me otherwise. It wasn't like I could do anything if someone could brute force it, so all I could have done was worry unnecessarily, but maybe I would have been paying more attention. Maybe I could have caught the intruder before they emerged into real space. The method they used wasn't brute force either. Real space didn't tremble and quake like it did when void ships emerged from the warp. The veil merely rippled, like the surface of a still pond after someone threw a pebble into it. They weren't large ripples either, and I doubted anyone besides myself and Valineth felt them. Celine was doing better now, but she was much more suited to the more direct applications of her psychic might. She was a bit of a brute, to be blunt, when it came to psychic talent at least. Not that I would ever say it to her face. The only other psyker currently awake in the system was Zara, and she wasn't all that powerful. Her senses just weren't sharp enough. Firstly, in maybe a tiny bit of panic, I made sure the invader didn't emerge near me to ambush me like the Deathwatch kill team. Then I quickly made sure neither Celine and my other friends, were they my friends? Did they count as friends? I wasn't sure, were under assault. Only after I was sure everyone of importance was fine, did I launch into investigating this anomaly. Firstly, I peered into the warp, trying to track traces of the invaders passing. There was certainly something there, but it felt like it was just out of touch, just a bit beyond the horizon, hiding. It faintly reminded me of the way the webway felt, though cruder and much less adept at hiding from my senses. The webway was impossible to sense if you weren't absolutely sure it was there. After a minute, which was practically an eternity for me with my processing speed dialed up to the limit, I decided that I wouldn't find what I suspected to be a hidden void ship. Not without plunging into the warp and starting to poke around myself, at least, which I had no intention of doing. Instead, I decided to track the invaders themselves in real space. I followed the ripples, faint and uncertain as they were, they led me towards Thalia. Nothing more concrete than that. Not that I needed more than that. A blink brought me into high orbit about the jungle planet. Thalia was a beautiful planet from this high up, an emerald gem. The whole of it was covered in swathes of thick jungles, even the seas and oceans were teeming with vicious plant life. So much so that I couldn't even see any color other than shades of green when I looked down at it. My aura spread out, flowing around and through the planet. Information flooded my mind, more than any human could have parsed, much less comprehended, all at once. My mind held vestiges of humanity, but it was much more malleable. Even without subsuming some mind cores to boost my primary mind's processing power, I could feel my psyche stretch as needed to accommodate the titanic inflow of information. Bioenergy and soul energy flowed into me, granting me mental boosts as needed. Had it been anyone else searching for the invader, or invaders, the death world of Valia would have been a prime hiding spot. Not only was it a hostile world teeming with murderous wildlife, but the planet's spirit also acted to somewhat shroud any souls hiding within. Alas, I was built different. I didn't go searching for souls or psychic signatures. What I did was catalog every last living being on Valia and check them for their connection to the collective consciousness. A single being stood out, a sole existence not connected to the collective. Smirking in triumph, I focused on the invader, finally getting eyes on them as the visual feedback reached me, and promptly grimaced. Motherfucker, I swore, sending a slew of curses towards that stinky golden skeleton on Terra. There he was, 10 feet tall, covered in the fanciest ceramite power armor I had seen, tearing through a group of carnivorous plants that were trying to make a meal out of him. Just when everything was starting to go so well, I whined, lamenting the headaches I could foresee in my near future. I had the urge to kill something, but held myself back and took in a deep, calming breath. All right. Whatever. I can handle it. Totally. Once I was done pitying myself and lamenting my fate, I returned my focus to my invader and rethought my strategy. All my previous plans for dealing with him were thrown out, since they didn't account for one simple thing. He was a fucking primarch. Now then, I said, the mock cheer ringing fake in my voice even to myself. Let's go and find out what the fuck the lion is doing on my new planet. This should be fun. At least the Tau had fucked off already, so I wouldn't have to explain this to them. A few minutes earlier, Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the Dark Angels, trudged through the deep, shadowy forest. Before him floated a tiny pinprick of golden light, dancing through the air and illuminating his path. This was the longest he had spent in this strange forest realm, the furthest he had walked within. Forest walking, as he had come to call his strange, newly discovered ability, was still mysterious to him. But one thing he knew was that it had something to do with his father, that old man in the boat, fishing in a pond while 4 twisted predatory fishes circled him, was his manifestation. It had to be. And that old man in the boat was the one to conjure this dancing golden light that led him into the depths of the forest, into shadowy corners and dark depths he had never walked before. He could cross stretches of space measured in light years and minutes while forest walking. These ancient forests, so reminiscent of his old homeworld, had power beyond his understanding. So what did it mean when the light guided him further and further, when the minutes turned into hours? He was being led somewhere far away. It worried him. The dark part of the galaxy, the half cut off by the Great Rift, needed him. He had taken it upon himself to protect humanity from those who would prey on them in their hour of weakness, be they corrupt governors, lazy bureaucrats, incompetent military commanders, or any of the more insidious horrors dwelling in the shadows. His sons needed him. He knew the tensions between the fallen and the loyalist dark angels. He hadn't had the chance to meet with the latter group yet, having spent his time seeking out fallen, judging whether they needed to be slain, or were worthy of becoming the risen, with whom he fought against all who plagued the part of the Imperium bereft of the Astronomican's light. He feared the dark angels, or what had become of them, would hunt his risen while the latter went on with the quest he had been taken away from. He should be there, ready to unify the shattered legion into what it should have been. Alas, when the Emperor calls, the lion would always answer. Wherever his father needed him was far, and he had little idea how long this mysterious task would take. Why now? He wondered. Up until now, you only led me to my fallen sons. What could be so important? Where even? The surrounding forests grew darker still, the branches curling to obstruct his path, vicious brambles seeking to bar his path. The small wisp of golden light pulsed once, and the obstruction vanished, evaporating into glittering dust. Then the forest shifted, and the lion had been through this song and dance enough times to know what that meant. He was back in real space, he had reached his destination. His thought lingered on what he had witnessed, at the sight of something trying to bar his path. He knew the woods his forest walking took him into weren't a real place, but a manifestation of the warp. In that place, thoughts were as real and solid as walls and fortresses were built out of emotions. That wall of brambles was a representation of something, a barrier, most likely, trying to keep people out. That all flashed through his mind in a blink, and he prepared himself for a less than warm welcome. He had never experienced his forest walking being obstructed, and he suspected he would not have been able to pass through the brambles without the golden light of his father. He raised his alertness to the limit, his mighty shield, once wielded by his father, the Emperor, held at the ready while the other grasped the hilt of his hissing power sword tightly. Not a full second after his re-emergence into real space, his alertness paid off already. A creature lashed out at him from above, a thick vine covered in thorns snapped at him, aiming to wrap around his neck and saw through his armor. His blade hissed through the air in a blink, blue arcs of energy dancing across its surface as it cut through the vine like a hot knife through butter. The lion didn't relax, he couldn't, as a dozen more vines from all around snapped at him with a viciousness that indicated a need for vengeance. But plants never had a chance against the man who had once been called the Emperor's exterminator. He had fought the most wicked and powerful of mankind's enemies. The Rongda and the Ascended Crave, and many others that could have contested mankind's claim for the stars. While his brothers fought the weaklings, the disparate human nations and the primitive Xenos, he had fought only the worst of the worst. He didn't even break a sweat as he slaughtered the overgrown houseplant, taking some satisfaction in the fact that not a single thorn managed to so much as touch his armor. Of course, that was not the last of his foes. His forest walking has apparently dumped him in the middle of a thick jungle, overflowing with hostile flora and fauna. They had nothing on the great beasts of Caliban, his homeworld. And he had been slaughtering those mutated monstrosities since he could walk. These plants and animals were nothing. Man-eating plants the size of tanks, vicious felines with scorpion-like tails, beasts the size of houses covered in rock-like hides. His shield broke their charge, reflecting the impact upon his enemies, and his blade sliced through their mighty bodies without effort. It wasn't his favored blade, the one he had used during the Great Crusade and the Heresy, but it was the best one he could find within the rock's vaults. He must have spent minutes lost in the frenzy of battle, relying on instinct and centuries of experience to slaughter these lesser beasts. They came at him with an eerie cohesion, almost reminding him of the relentless tides of tyranids, if only faintly. He wasn't sure why, perhaps because he was a stranger in this world, but they fought him, and not each other. Predators and herbivores faced him together, beasts that should have been natural enemies now charging the alien among them, as if under the understanding that until he was killed, the natural order of things would be suspended. But even if they had a cohesion vaguely reminiscent of the tyranids, these animals and bloodthirsty plants lacked the ability to truly harm him. They didn't have the wicked scythes or bones words of hive tyrants, they didn't have bioplasma that could melt through steel. Even when a strike slipped through the lion's guard, when a jaw closed around his ankle, when a charge caught him across the shoulder, he remained unharmed. His armor held and protected him, and there was nothing that could so much as slow his relentlessly swinging blade. He fell into a practiced rhythm, the slaughter almost turning into a chore as he began to wonder what could have been so important on this inhospitable death world, because what else would a planet with a jungle this vicious be? That he had been led here? It couldn't be another of his fallen sons in need of redemption, or elimination. In the case of those who had truly fallen, there had to be one closer, and his father never took much of an interest in that specific self-appointed mission of his. No, this had to be something more. Something more important, something that was worth leaving behind Imperium Nihilus. Every day he spent away, the people of the many worlds were beset by horrors. Yet, he still trusted his father not to waste his time with chores and errands. What could it be then? He hoped to find out soon, because the clock was ticking. He didn't have the luxury to take his sweet time. The people needed him. 227, Surprise Quest. While Echidna stalked her latest source of headaches as he slaughtered his way through Valia, another problem was brewing across the stars, a problem that would be a headache not only for her, but for Kafis Kane as well. The erstwhile commissar knew not what the near future had in store for him as he lounged in his luxurious room, granted to him by the governor of Karlak. It was the capital world of the Imperium of Mankind in the sector, the principal seat of the Achilles Crusade. As such, it was the most well-defended fortress world in the entire sector, especially since it was also the central planet of the Iron Collar, the circle of fortress worlds and listening posts surrounding the Well of Night and the Jericho Warp Gate at its center. The Maw Gate, which he was scheduled to pass through on board Amberley Vale's ship in a week. Finally, he would be back in the Imperium proper, not in the galactic equivalent of the Bunas, where all kinds of horrors could come crawling out of every bush and asteroid. Kane decided he much preferred orcs and even tyranids to the unknown xeno-horrors of the galactic fringe. Hells, he'd much rather take a stroll through a Necron tomb world than meet that psyker who made a hobby out of stomping on common sense. Ever since he'd escaped that horribly stressful negotiation, he hadn't let his trusty aide, Jurgen, out of his sight. Only knowing Jurgen's peculiar abilities might ward off the possibility of another crazy psyker teleporting over to turn his mind into mush with a thought, finally letting him get a good night's sleep. He didn't even mind that his longtime aide's continued aversion to the concept of hygiene made his luxurious sweet smell decidedly non-luxurious. Scented candles helped with that problem, and they also set the mood for when Amberley, now and then, spent the night. Thankfully, Jurgen had long learned to keep to himself in any such situation, so only his unique bouquet lingered in the suite, not the man himself. All in all, the rest of his time in the Jericho Reach promised to be luxurious, relaxing and bereft of any firefights. Lounging on his sofa as he sipped on some quality amasec delivered to him straight from the governor's personal collections, such were the benefits of being a celebrated hero of the Imperium, Kane decided that he had enough excitement for a dozen lifetimes already, and so, he would retire once they got back to the Imperium proper. Again. He just had to make sure his retirement would last this time, maybe choose a nice little pleasure world as his destination, not Perlia, which he had had to save from an invasion twice now. He wasn't sure how he should broach the subject to Amberley. You didn't just tell an inquisitor that you wanted to retire without getting shot in the head. Most people who worked with any of the Ordos knew too much to be allowed a peaceful retirement, and he suspected that whether he got the go-ahead or a bullet through the head would be down to Amberley's mood. Something he still failed to properly read, even after centuries of knowing the enigmatic and extremely dangerous woman. Sir? Jurgen's usually toneless voice interrupted his musings, the hint of confusion and hesitance now present in his aide's tone drawing Kane's attention to it. His palms tingled somewhat fiercely, making him grimace as he realized his relaxing last week might have just been dragged behind the barn and shot in the head. There is a runner outside insisting you present yourself for a meeting. I thought to just send him away as he is outside the chain of command you are in, but he seemed frightened, so I thought I would mention it at least. Good old Jurgen. No one could ward off invitations to boring meetings and soul-crushingly tedious box calls better than him. He had long since grown used to wielding his borrowed influence like a club to keep any but the most important people from bothering him. He also believed in the chain of command, like it was the singular truth of the world, believing that it extended up from the humblest guardsman all the way up till the golden throne itself, unbroken. Meaning, he believed he was serving the emperor's will at all times by obeying his superior's command, which was Cain, the majority of the time. It wasn't one of the local general's runners? Cain asked, sitting up straighter. No, sir, Jurgen said, shaking his head with a put-upon frown on his face. I think it was one of the servants of this place. Whoever sent him must have just waved him down and sent him on his way. Could be a trap, Cain mused. The runner could be terrified because he'd been threatened? I doubt it, Jurgen said. He ran off the moment he delivered the message. Just seemed relieved to be done with it. His communicator beeped, and looking down, he saw a message from Amberly. It was short and simple, a room number in the fortress, maybe 3 floors down, and a short written message reading, "Get here right now. It's important. Keep your manners in check." Where did you say the runner told you I should go? Cain asked, and he wasn't even surprised when the floor and room number matched the one from Amberly's message. Well, he might have considered ignoring the runner, but Amberly? He liked living a bit too much to risk angering her. Well, Jurgen, Cain said, rising to his feet with a reluctant grunt. It seems like we're going to a meeting. He remembered the last sentence about manners, which made him add, only small firearms you can hide under your clothes. Hide a few melted grenades under your vest if you can manage without it being obvious. Cain himself had a vibraknife and a lost pistol hidden under his greatcoat, but he left his chainsword behind. 10 minutes later, they approached the hallway, and he started second-guessing himself. The hallway was as empty as a graveyard. There was no more obvious trap in history, which was why he doubted it was a trap at all. No one this amateurish would dare to ambush him inside a fortress world as fortified as this. Keep your eyes peeled, he murmured, thumbing the grip of his hidden sidearm as he looked around with a narrowed gaze. Nothing. Then they were before the door leading to the room in question, a massive conference hall, by the little tablet hanging next to it on the wall. The door was massive, oversized for normal humans, and it didn't take Cain long to figure out why. He had met Astartes before, been on missions with the Reclaimers chapter long ago as a liaison for the commissariat and the guard. This conference hall was made with Astartes in mind, that was why the doorframe was 10 feet tall and 4 feet wide. He caught hints of a conversation from inside, well, more like a report. Only, it was Amberly's voice speaking the report, and she was doing so in a deferential tone. Shit. Who could make an inquisitor act deferential? He really didn't want to find out. If he knew the answer to that question back then, he would have turned around and run as fast as his feet would carry him. He wouldn't have stopped until he managed to smuggle himself through the warp gate and got a sector or two of distance between himself and whatever trouble was brewing here. Alas, he didn't know, and as such, he merely suppressed a sigh and knocked on the door. In a moment, he put on the face of Cain the hero, straight-backed, charismatic, inspiring, dependable. Enter. The voice that spoke was deep, powerful, rumbling in Cain's bones. He wanted to curse, knowing that getting embroiled in Astartes' problems usually wasn't healthy for anyone involved, especially fragile little normal humans like him. He squared his shoulders and elegantly opened the door, stepping inside with all the fake grace and confidence he had learned to project over his long life. His eyes landed on Amberly first, and a cold knot of dread coiled in his gut. Not because she seemed to be in danger, or under threat or anything of the sort, but just because she looked so subdued, almost submissive. It felt unnatural to see her this way, but he understood at the moment he let his gaze pan around to take in the room. His eyes zeroed in on the only other occupant of the room, who he had almost dismissed as an ostentatious statue. No Astartes was that large, and no Astartes wore gold, not as their primary color anyway, none would dare. Then his brain caught up with him, and he paled, and quickly bowed really deeply. "My lord," he said, proud of himself for not letting his voice waver. "You asked for me? What in the Emperor's name was a custodian doing here, of all places?" A better question yet was, what could a custodian want with him? "I have," the custodian said, still as a statue aside from the slightest tilt of his helmet. "Rise. I am Octavian Gauius of the Custodian Guard, on a mission from the Captain General himself, and I am in need of information. Your superior here has enlightened me to some of what I wanted to know, but I believe in working with all available information when possible." "I am at your service," Cain said, his words not a lie for once. He still failed to fully comprehend it. Astartes were legends, each warrior deserving of songs. But custodes? Never in his life had he so much as heard of anyone he knew meeting a custodian. They guarded the Golden Throne, serving only the Emperor. They were the 10,000, the most elite, the most disciplined, the most faithful. They were more than legends, they were myths. As much of a non-religious man as Cephas Cain was, he still venerated the God Emperor in his heart of hearts. He just believed people should live their lives and achieve their goals by themselves, without screaming prayers at the Emperor to do everything for them. He was a believer, not an Emperor botherer. So while his reaction was more subdued than a battle sister's or an ecclesiarch's would have been, he still felt awed as he stood in the presence of one of the Emperor's custodian guards. One of only 10,000 across the entire galaxy. And he was standing before him. Asking for, what exactly? "What information are you seeking, exactly, my lord?" Cain asked, his every word crafted with deliberate care and delivered in a properly submissive tone. When dealing with superhumans, it always pays to be extremely careful. You never knew what would set off a particular Astartes chapter. They each had their ticks he usually researched before meeting any. But a custodian? A living myth that the majority of the Imperium might not even believe truly exists? And with the meeting practically dumped on his head, he hadn't the faintest clue what not to say. For all he knew, acting too submissive would offend the custodian. Some Astartes saw any guardsman showing even the slightest indication of fear as a personal offense, one that they sought to fix post-haste. Usually, by turning the offender into a combat servitor to better serve the Emperor. If it wasn't obvious yet, he was thinking of the Iron Hands. Few chapters were as terrifying as the Iron Hands. Whoever thought infecting space marines with the mechanicums, the flesh is weak lunacy was a good idea? I seek information about the events on the planet known as Kazathor, was it, Inquisitor? The custodian asked, which was weird. Even space marines tended to have near-perfect memory. It was likely social maneuvering then, for some reason Cain couldn't decipher. "Yes, my lord," Amberly replied with a nod. Near the Canis Salient, a non-imperial human world at high risk of becoming a chaos world, its society infected by hidden cultists of the ruinous powers up to the highest echelons. "Yes, Kazathor," the custodian said musingly, almost dismissively. "What interests me more is how those cultists met their end, and at whose hands. I want to know everything about your encounter with the being known as Echidna. From what I hear from the Inquisitor," she introduced herself as Amelia Dot. Cain felt a bit faint as a dawning sense of impending doom almost bowled him over. He had really been hoping this was about anything else, but it seemed he had escaped that mess far too easily. He also took note of the fact that the custodian referred to her as the being known as Echidna. Not the rogue psyker Amelia. Not the xenosorceress Echidna. No. The being known as Echidna. Implying the custodian didn't know what she really was, and also suspected the name he knew her wasn't her real name. Cain was not liking those implications at all. Still, he began speaking, recounting his experiences to the best of his ability with the diligence and detail expected of a military officer and then some. 2:28, unwinding the clock. "I know you are there," the lion called out, his helmet slowly panning around as he searched for his invisible foe. He found nothing, but he knew. "I feel your presence, your attention, your feelers poking at my mind. This won't end well for you." That was the interesting part. He could feel that something was prodding at his mind, He could feel someone watching, more than one someone, but only one made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, and unlike the weak beasts around him, that distant, hidden presence taking potshots at his mind felt hints of danger he hadn't experienced since his return. The forest was weird, and he would have suspected the whole of it to be under the sway of some psychic beast or xeno, were it not for the force mentally poking him feeling so distinct from the surrounding forest. The lion was no psyker, he never had been. He was a warrior through and through, but he supposed if he had forest walking, there had to be something inherently psychic in him. He was the first, after all, the template from which all other permarks were derived. The original. If some of them had clear psyker abilities, like Magnus, he supposed he too must have had it in him, buried deep. So he trusted his instincts, even if it had led him astray before. Well, not in a combat situation, but his gut feelings didn't seem to be similarly infallible in social situations. You felt that? A feminine voice tinged with surprise echoed around him, coming from everywhere and nowhere. He stayed still, not feeling even a hint of a presence. His quarry was not nearby, just projecting her voice. Apologies are in order then, I've never seen a mind as robust as yours before, I just had to see whether I could poke through its defenses. She had poked through his defenses, not that they were all that impressive, but that was by design. His mind was a trap, one laid for arrogant psychers who sought to exploit that weakness. Not a single psycher had escaped the confines of his mind once they dared poke their noses inside it to date. But this one refrained from actually entering his mind, apparently satisfied with merely poking at his defenses. It was mildly irritating, but nothing he couldn't deal with. This foe either had no self-control or treated him as nothing more than a source of amusement. Her words, the lilt of her voice and her actions thus far gave him some idea of her personality. Catty, playful, maybe malicious and perhaps sadistic, but more than anything, arrogant. Or was she? No psyker he knew would dare just poke him in the brain if they weren't assured of their own safety. He didn't tend to take such attacks as anything less than a personal offense, which usually didn't end well for the psyker in question. Who are you? He asked, frowning under his helm. The only psychers who had ever made him feel this level of danger were Magnus and the Sigillite. Though those two had felt more refined, while this one felt more strange than anything. Like there was an ocean of danger slumbering under the surface, but only a tiny part of it was awake and above the surface. The thought of waking that slumbering beast even gave him a sense of wariness. Any name I could give you would mean little to you, I'd wager, the feminine voice said after a moment. But I've come to refer to myself as Echidna these days. That name prickled the lion's memories, something deep and almost forgotten. What was it? He frowned and turned his focus inward, digging up the ancient memory. A book. Ancient beyond belief, from the Sigillite's library, and from ancient Terra before that. The polytheistic religions of old Earth, written in the 5th millennium, about forgotten religions that were considered nothing more than history even by then. He finally remembered the passage that mentioned the name. He doubted this woman knew, but then again, maybe she did. Echidna was not a common name, and it was a bit too specific to be a mistake, probably. Stranger things have happened. A dark name, he said, no judgment in his voice, but a question. Did she know about ancient Terra somehow? He never had much interest in ancient history, not unless they held some lesson for warfare within. Still, that would be interesting nonetheless. I know, she said, a chuckle echoing around him. You're well read. I would have expected your brother to recognize it, and maybe he did, just never mentioned it. But it fits. The Mother of Monsters. Quite the title, but it doesn't have quite the same ring to it as Lord of the First, does it? She knew. She knew who he was, and she had met Robot. Or maybe it was a lie to throw him off? And still, she attacked his mind, something she should have known not to do to someone like him. His temper had dimmed since his awakening, but it had been legendary during the heresy and the Crusades before. Arrogance. Or perhaps not. If she could wake up the danger that lurked beneath the surface and call on it, he might have to get serious. She certainly felt more powerful than anything he had faced since his awakening, even just as she was. And that included the war master of a Chaos War band, one of his fallen sons who had turned into a chaos sorcerer over the years, who had almost killed him. Were it not for his risen son's timely rescue, he would now be in a flesh suit worn by that deranged son of his as he tried to assassinate the emperor. He never would have considered it before, but perhaps prudence would be more advisable than instant violence here. Imperium Nihilus needed him, the Dark Angels needed him, humanity needed him. He couldn't die here, there was no point in attacking this psyker, not yet. Wasn't worth the risk. Especially with his weakened body. Maybe in his heyday, he would have been confident enough to disregard the risk, ignore the lack of benefits and forget the greater mission in favor of removing a possible enemy. She spoke to Robot, and she is alive. The lion mused. His brother was not a mighty warrior, not compared to him, Kuz or Ongran, but he was strong, and he was smart. He avoided fighting her or perhaps spared her. Robot always did advocate for making better use of xeno races, instead of merely exterminating them. In this day and age, that idea might hold even more weight. Humanity was alone among the stars. No allies in sight. But he was no negotiator, he was a warrior, a protector. He would leave implementing ideas like that to his brother if he saw it fit. "You've met my brother?" he asked. Hundreds of thoughts had gone through his head, but only a second of silence passed between them. "Yep," the disembodied voice replied. "Found myself on Baal a while back and was there when he arrived with his crusade. We fought a nasty tyrannid together." I can feel Dante's smell on you, you've met." "He didn't talk about me?" "I'm hurt." A rogue psyker killed the Swarm Lord, stable enough to converse with and yet powerful enough to give pause to the chapter's librarian, Mephiston. Lord Gilliman allowed them to assist in the ensuing assault on the final Tyrannid stronghold. A snippet of Chapter Master Dante's report surged to the forefront of his mind. Rogue psyker? The lion had seen rogue psykers and killed plenty. They were all unhinged, dangerous to themselves and everyone around them. Without education, tools, suppressants, and the Imperium's help, they never had the ability to hold the warp at bay. He talked of a rogue psyker, the lion said. One just barely on the right side of sanity to prove useful in repelling the Tyrannid onslaught on his homeworld. Rude, she sniffed, then snorted in amusement. The air before him shimmered, then coalesced into a humanoid form. An illusion, he knew, his other senses told him there was no one there and yet his eyes were fooled. That's what I get for saving his chapter from annihilation. Oh well, your brother repaid me for my troubles, mostly. He eyed her for a moment, evaluating everything she was showing with the eye of a warrior. Sure, it was just an illusion, and everything could be false, but even that would grant him some insight into her personality by analyzing what she was showing. Normal human-sized body, no apparent cybernetics or other enhancements. She wore armor from the neck down that reminded him of Eldar battle gear, but with a more organic twist. From the back up, she seemed normal enough, though he recognized artificial perfection when he saw it. Smooth skin without pores, a perfectly symmetrical face, a pair of emerald eyes that glowed and long silver blonde hair that swayed in the wind, despite the air being still in the forest. Not that a breeze would have any effect on an illusion. Those eyes, too, seemed like she plucked them out of an Eldar's face and implanted them in her own eye sockets. That gem-like quality and vivid coloration were unmistakable. He mentally added vein among her descriptors in his mind, and noted that no human from today's Imperium, or even from the Imperium he knew, would ever even want to share a single visual trait with a Xeno. That made him suspect this woman, if she even was one, or a human at all, who knew what lay behind those illusions, after all. Lacked the xenophobia that was so widespread in the Imperium. Or perhaps she was a Xeno, maybe even an Eldar, and those eyes were a subtle taunt. Mostly? He asked to keep her speaking. She seemed to like hearing the sound of her own voice, every word was another brushstroke, painting a clearer and clearer picture. "Well, I'm something of a post-cognitive," she said, tilting her head like she wasn't sure that was the right word. "I can kinda browse through the past. We made a deal, I answered questions and he gave me fun biosamples for my collection. Unfortunately, my bait wasn't good enough, so he refused to pay the price for my juiciest piece of information." "Biosamples?" Then perhaps the armor truly was organic, and the illusion might have truly shown her real form. A biomancer, then. And an illusionist, obviously. Reasonably powerful in both if she could battle a swarmlord and project an image from beyond the reach of his senses. What price? The lion asked, consciously keeping his grip on his sword relaxed. A single hair, she said, huffing, then gave him a thoughtful look. But perhaps you would like to make the deal instead? Unfortunately, Dante spoiled that your brother is alive and active already, so my second juiciest bit of information is gone. But the first remains. The two of you aren't alone, someone else you knew during the crusade and the heresy remains active to this day. I'll tell you who, what name they go by, and even give you a clue to catching their trail for a single lock of your hair, or you can spit on me instead if that's what you're into. He just stared at her for a moment. The shock and relief weren't as great as the first time, but it still hit him with a strength that would have made a lesser man collapse. He wasn't alone, he knew that already. He had Robot also working towards a better future on the other end of the galaxy, but another person he knew? A large part of him wanted to grab the woman and shake her until she coughed up the information. But she was an illusion, and he doubted Robot wouldn't have tried to keep her locked up if she wasn't especially slippery, or powerful enough to at least escape containment. His armor held psychic shielding and would protect him from attacks, but it did little to stop a psyker from fleeing if he couldn't grab them physically. Still, his own genes and DNA, the personal work of his father, ending up in a rogue biomancer's hands? Not worth the risk. If there was another who remained, they would make contact when they felt the time was right. The ripples were spreading, and the Imperium would know of his return in time. Any who wanted to meet him would know, though tracking him down might give them some headaches. Once I have the Dark Angels rebuilt and unified, they can just reach me through them. I'm afraid I'll have to refuse, the lion said. I have seen what a rogue scientist can do with even a fraction of the Emperor's work at their disposal. Unfortunate, she said, clicking her tongue as she squinted at him. What if I spice up the deal? Throw in a little extra. What? He asked, only not shutting down her suggestion instantly out of curiosity. What could a rogue psyker offer him beyond information that she thought would tempt him? You have an ailment plaguing you, she said. One that has drained your strength, leaving the limits of your capabilities reduced. I can fix that. He growled, brows furrowing in irritation as a memory played out in his mind. What have you done to me? Remove this curse at once? He had asked the defeated Chaos Marine. What curse? The man choked, confusion evident. My strength. What have you done to me? The defeated Marine stared, then let out a throaty chuckle. Me? I've done nothing, my Lord Lion. It is time that plagues you, it has finally come for you too, after 10 millennia. You simply got old. I am one of the best biomancers in the galaxy at the moment, the woman continued, her previous catty playfulness gone in favor of grave professionalism. Good, she took it seriously. Very good. The Lyona doubted his temper would bear it if she dared to mock his age. Perhaps a homunculi, Fabius Bile or a Luminar Cirrus could rival or eclipse me, but none of them is the sort you dare place yourself under the care of, are they? Neither are you, he said irritably. Nor do I trust you or any other Xeno to be able to do what you claim. The woman stared at him for a moment, then a slow, devious smile with a hint of malice spread on her lips. Then let me prove you wrong, she said lightly, her voice dancing with amused expectation. Your hair wouldn't be the first Primarch sample I got. So let me demonstrate what I can do with what I have. The illusion stepped back and held out its hand, above it a tiny rip in space formed and out came a tiny, pebble-sized bundle of alabaster white tendrils. The lion stiffened, his face paling slightly in horror under his helmet. He recognized those tendrils, he knew exactly what they were. The Emperor's personal bioengineering artifact. The thing he had used to make and build his custodes, and if his suspicion was correct, his brothers and himself too. What was that doing in a rogue psyker's hands? His spiraling train of thought suddenly halted as the writhing tendrils seemed to surge, making him take a step back and raise his shield. This was not good. He doubted this psyker had even a fraction of his father's understanding of genetics and biology, and knew she didn't have his incredible psychic might, but with that tool in her hands, she could make an army that would be unrivaled outside the 10,000. Given enough time. The tendrils grew, jumping from her palm onto the dirt before him, landing on a pair of feet. It now had a humanoid form that grew to match him in size, though perhaps it was marginally more slender. The form coalesced, white flesh turning pink as skin grew over it. A silken purple cloak covered the form, and finally, the head started clearing up. Elegant, graceful features were drawn across a blank face as a mane of long white hair grew and cascaded down the being's shoulders. The lion almost gasped, but that was instantly replaced by liquid fury. He knew that face, of course, he did. Even if he had seen it twist and get warped into something horrendous during the crusade, how could he forget the face of one of his brothers? How could he forget the face of Fulgrim? The lion growled as the replica opened his eyes and stared at him. It was not the prideful arrogance of the Phoenician that shone within, but the gleeful amusement of the psyker he had been talking to. What is healing old age when I can build an entire body worthy of a premarch from nothing? She spoke with Fulgrim's voice, though the tone and lilt would have given her away instantly, even if he wasn't already aware. Then, before his eyes, Fulgrim started changing just as his anger was about to drive him into attacking. He grew younger. Then started shrinking, like someone was turning back the clock, playing a hollow recording on reverse. Quicker and quicker, each year flaking away from the visage of his loathsome brother faster and faster. In just a few seconds, a baby Fulgrim sat in the undergrowth before him. 229, herding a grumpy cat. You can kill this clone, if you want, I said, regrowing the Fulgrim meat puppet to full size as I went back to talking from my illusory self. I bet it would be therapeutic. Why show me this? He growled, fingers tightening around his blade, and I could hear he spoke through gritted teeth and clenched jaw. He was restraining his anger, but I could feel that too, like a leashed storm growing wilder and wilder with every second it was kept restrained. How did you even? Honestly, I had been expecting a shield bash to the face the moment I showed myself. The only book I'd read with the lion in it back in my old life was The Son of the Forest, which told the tale of his return in the 42nd millennium. But I knew some things about his exploits and personality from before. I had been expecting a paranoid, violent, xenophobic asshole who killed first and asked questions never. It was quite a surprise that he was still talking to me. Though probably not. He was said to be one of the best strategists among the Primarchs, so he must have known how futile that would have been. I never showed my real body, and he could tell. Speaking of, my real body was up in high orbit, floating idly. Well, out of range of anything the lion could throw at it. I wasn't just goading him because I was an asshole, by the way. Showing him my Fulgrim clone was a statement. I already had Primarch genes, and his would only be an addition to my collection, not a massive breakthrough in my power level. It was also kind of a test to see how short his fuse was. I was considering showing him around one of my arcologies to maybe get him on my side. But not if he'd have a random murderous meltdown at the slightest offense. And by get him on my side, I mean keep him ambivalent to me. If he left me alone to do my thing and didn't organize a crusade to murder me the moment he got back to Imperial space, I'd count my goals fulfilled. The bonus would be grabbing his genetic samples, but it was not at all crucial. I'd rather keep him ambivalent than steal a hair from him and enrage him. Of course, if he accepted my de-aging rejuvenation treatment, I'd get a hell of a lot more than a single hair. I show you this so you know I don't particularly need your genes, I'd just be happy to have a sample from another Primarch, I finally answered, choosing to go with honesty. Who knew how finely honed his instinctual lie detector was? And the how? How did I get this sample? Well, let's just say Fabius Bile has been a busy little bee, and he left some of his experiments in easily accessible places. They don't call him the Clone Lord for nothing. I heard he even made clones of Horus and a whole bunch of Ferrus Manus. Though the uncorrupted Fulgrim clone was likely his greatest work. I left out the teeny tiny part about that Fulgrim clone being perfect. Meaning, it had a true Primarch aura, and likely at least parts of the original Fulgrim's soul. That was not a nugget of information I was willing to give away for free, or to someone who would likely ignore the possible benefits of redeeming a traitor Primarch. Especially when that redemption was handed over to him on a silver platter. The lion might have grown more forgiving, but not that forgiving. He still did slaughter every last one of his fallen sons who had so much as breathed in chaos taint. Original Fulgrim did something much worse than that, a lot of somethings, many times. He was still doing it on his hedonistic chaos world. I could almost feel the sheer waves of displeasure and loathing radiate off of him, but they washed over and around me, not aimed at me but at the ancient apothecary far away, skulking among the stars. Still, some of it stuck with me, but it came with the faintest hint of grudging appreciation. He must have felt more annoyed by knowing so little about the current state of the wider Imperium than I had previously thought. That hint of positive emotion might as well have been the lion's equivalent of a thank you hug. Without another word, his power blade crackled and then flashed. The bluish energy left behind a trail, lingering as much in my retinas as on the skin of the universe before fading. As it did, the Fulgrim puppet's head slid off his shoulders and fell on the ground, quickly followed by the headless body collapsing on top of it. My eyes narrowed slightly as I compared the lion's speed and the power he struck my puppet with to what I had seen of Gilliman, and I had to give it to the old man. He was in a league beyond his Blueberry Boy Scout brother. Faster, stronger, more precise. That slash went through the neck, striking the neck between two vertebrae with pinpoint accuracy. Not that there was a need for it in this instant, since the power blade's molecular disruption field made slashing through human flesh and bones disturbingly effortless. And while Fulgrim was a Primarch, he had been built as an agile fighter leaning on his inherently powerful healing factor. He was a bit more fragile than most of his brothers as a result. I thought so, at least, based on what I remembered. I knew he had at least once been shot in the head by a sniper and survived, and that was before going balls to the walls on the Chaos Ascension, before he turned into an overgrown snake. Weaker than the original, he grunted. This one was just a genetic replica, just the body as it was designed and built by the Emperor, I shrugged. There is much more to you, Primarchs, than the vessel you inhabit, I'd wager. The Ecclesiarchy might not be right about the vast majority of things, but naming you demigods might have been the few times they hit the nail on the head. A broken clock is right twice a day and all that. His mind was strange. Robust, deep as the abyss, sharp as a blade's edge, but not defended, not really. No rookie telepath would be able to enter, but a better one would have only some trouble. A trap, like I had previously observed. But that didn't matter for now. What it meant was that his emotions weren't locked inside his mind, shrouded beneath a layer of shadows and sheltering behind walls of impregnable will. His emotions washed off of him in tidal waves, almost making the warp tremble in his wake when his rage spiked. You are a strange one, he said, his voice low and evaluating. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his gaze as it bore into me, analyzed everything it saw and weighed it, judged it, measured it. You know things no human should, what no other human I've met does. Not in this age. It wasn't a question, but it kind of was. I'm an old soul, I said, shrugging nonchalantly as I plastered a thin, mysterious smile on my face. A non-answer to his non-answer, only hinting at an answer that was, in truth, quite misleading. You are the strange one to me, a supposed demigod punching through the shadow I had plunged this system into, the shield that had been keeping me safe from greater demons and warp invaders alike. And yet, you just strolled through it, without a warp drive or a ritual, under your own power. Primarch or not, that is stranger than knowing a few tidbits that had long departed mankind's collective knowledge base, I would say. On that note, might I ask what brought you to this planet? I went out of my way to find the most out-of-the-way hellhole of a dirtball to make into my hideout. I'm searching, he answered curtly, and I felt his sense of frustration rising. He did not like our situation, the one I had practically locked him in, at all. He couldn't find me, knew my illusion was fake, and likely thought tracking me down in this thick jungle would be an absolute nightmare with the local wildlife hounding him every step of the way. He couldn't act, not in a way that would decisively and quickly end this, and so he had to use words. The horror. His impatience was obvious, speaking clearly of the fact that he wanted to be here just about as much as I wanted him here. Did he get sent on an errand? I mused, wondering what could have managed to drag the Primarch of the first halfway across the galaxy, or who? A divine errand from Daddy Dearest? Maybe meddling from a farcer? A deceptive whisper from a Tsienchen demon into the right ear? I would have dearly loved to eliminate the first idea as outlandish, but I couldn't, and the more I thought about it, the more reasonable it seemed. The Shadow Keeper, that annoying custodian, Gilliman's sputtering flaming sword, the skeletal boogeyman had his eye holes on me. I knew he wasn't quite there in the head. 10 millennia spent on the galaxy's most horrible torture chair unfortunately tended to have that effect on people, and he had a bit of a shattered soul problem too, which only made his other problems worse. So it wasn't too much of a stretch, in my humble opinion, to say one of his errant fragments just so happened to notice me, then proceeded to bully a custodian into annoying me with cryptic dreams. When that didn't work, he might have managed to yank a few more fragments together to step up his game and send me a pre-march on express delivery. Searching for what exactly? I asked, tilting my head like I wasn't 60% sure he was here for my ass. The glare he sent my way when I showed my tendrils before was a thing to behold, heavily tinged with recognition. I just so happened to have been planning on starting to tame this world, but with a lion stalking its woods, I might have to change my plans. Even if you refuse my offer to rejuvenate you, I'd be happy to help if it gets you back to your likely much more important business elsewhere. Why was I so conflict-averse? Well, because while I still didn't have hard evidence of the existence of fate and plot armor, Primarchs canonically were favored by both. No Primarch could die a lame death. That was a fundamental law of the universe. So, no chucking him into a star, drowning him in an ocean, harassing him until he collapsed in a war of attrition. Somehow, he would turn the situation on its head and make my life difficult. At least, that's what I suspected true Primarch tier plot armor worked like. I so didn't need that shit in my life. He didn't answer for a moment, but the deep look he sent my illusion, like he was dissecting every last shred of energy and smidge of color making it up, was answer enough. Especially when combined with the reaction he had to my tentacles. Did those Shadowkeeper bastards get to him and fill his head with tales of me stealing their precious artifact? Nothing concrete, he said eventually. But there is only one thing I've seen so far that would have warranted my presence. I shouldn't have shown the tendrils, I said with a weary sigh, already preparing ideas and plans for the eventuality of dealing with him. I couldn't fight him head-on, and that meant I couldn't kill him, since I couldn't make the fight epic enough. But that didn't mean I had to roll over and die, far from it. There were a lot of options open to me that didn't include fighting him face to face. How did you get your hands on them? He asked, his voice still steady even as his body shifted into a relaxed combat stance. He likely caught some micro-expression in my illusion that showed my shifting plans. Funny story, that one, I said. One moment I'm dead, the next I wake up possessing a creepy mass of tentacles in a dilapidated building. Imagine my surprise when I found out 40,000 years had passed since my death. A far-fetched tale, he said, though I felt him to be more thoughtful than doubting. So you claim to have just woken up possessing the artifact? Well, I did feel something tugging at me, likely whichever idiot thought it was a good idea to shove a slumbering soul into a bioweapon. I shrugged again. It is mine now. I have fought every hound that's been sent after me since and hid away here in the hopes that I could be finally left alone. Tell me, Lord Lion, will I have to run again? Will you chase me across the stars with that strange power of yours? Will we play an interstellar game of cat and mouse? Waste possibly years of our lives, or would you be open to being convinced to let me be? I hardly have the capability to chase you if you escape with a spaceship from wherever you are hiding, he said, only a bit sourly. Yeah, right, I scoffed. I felt you breach the shadow in the warp under your own power, and felt the traces of your passing stretching deep into the warp. For all I know, you could take a step and appear before me, not before my illusion, but face to face with my true body, which is why I am floating in high orbit above this planet. It'll be a long way down from here for anyone who can't fly under their own power. He didn't say anything for a lengthy 5 seconds, the heavy weight of his gaze somehow pressing down on my shoulder despite not being physically present. He had an edge even Gilliman lacked, an edge that made me wary, despite knowing that I could probably take him out. If nothing else, I could teleport him deep into interstellar space or maybe throw him into the depths of an ocean. Though who knew how his forest walking worked? Maybe he really could just pop into the warp, then pop out with his boot already halfway up my ass. Indecision brimmed in his aura, spite warring with impatience as he considered my words. I could tell he would have loved nothing more than to wring my neck and be done with this post-haste, but he didn't, perhaps he couldn't. I had said that bit about him appearing before my true body, my avatar, that is, and I felt a mix of annoyance and frustration when I did. I noted that down, speculating that his forest walking probably wasn't capable of that level of accuracy. Still, I would take all due precautions. It was just speculation without hard proof, after all. I'm listening, he said. Reluctance, determination, annoyance, irritation, resolve. I couldn't help but smile. Now I just needed to come up with a way to convince him to sod off and let me be. I mean, convince him that the artifact was in the best possible hands and that I, too, worked towards the betterment of humanity. Maybe I'd get to play tour guide again. I'd just have to make sure no one mentioned the Imperial fleet or the salvaging efforts currently in progress. That could complicate matters. 2:30, the old lion. The lion mulled over the strange woman's proposal. Give her a chance to prove herself an ally of humanity? To prove that the artifact was best left in her hands? Humanity. Not the Imperium of mankind. He observed, noting the precise wording. Did she know he likewise found the Imperium of today downright abominable and instead focused on protecting humanity as a whole? Not the state, but the people. The dream of the Imperium was a dead and rotting carcass, feasted upon by the crows and demons. All that was left was to preserve what little was left. Humanity would survive, one way or another, even if the Imperium didn't. She claimed to be human. From before the dark age of technology, from the ancient times of Terra. He recalled. Her name was intriguing, but not ironclad proof of her words. Who knew what rotten noble's secret vault now held the ancient relics that once belonged to Malkador the hero? She could easily have learned the name there, though he admitted that it sounded convoluted. But more reasonable than her being a newborn perpetual? A perpetual. Like the Emperor, Malkador, and Erda and Vulcan. People for whom death was not the end, but merely a minor obstacle. He had never heard of one possessing a new body, though. They usually rebuilt their own bodies on instinct when it was destroyed. This woman claimed to have been just floating in the warp for 10,000 years until a suitable body was made available for her. There were some lingering problems in his logic, but the explanation was starting to become more and more believable. Though it was still some ways away from catching up to the much more believable and realistic explanation, she was lying. Not that he could do anything about the latter. His gut was telling him she was being honest, but he didn't trust his gut as much as he used to. Not since Luther. Not since Perturabo. Still, it was at least worth hearing her out. Her words and attempts to convince him would either fill in the gaps in his understanding and convince him, or reveal the lies she was trying to hide. Either way, he would need a better opportunity to strike at her true body either way. So, making her let her guard down, convincing her that he was listening, and slowly getting convinced, would be a prudent strategy. Very well, the lion finally replied, sheathing his blade as a sign of good faith but keeping his shield strapped to his arm. In most situations, the Emperor's shield was a weapon more dangerous than his power sword, doubly so because few could foresee its mysterious power reflecting their attacks back on them. 1 hour. Show me what you wish. Do with that what you will. Wonderful, the woman exclaimed happily, clapping her hands together. The lion stiffened, feeling something happening beneath the veil of the illusion, causing a prickling sense of danger to drive a needle into the back of his neck. He held still, though, merely squinting under his helmet as the illusion stepped closer to him. Well, the clock is ticking, so let's get to it. This planet is uninhabited at the moment, but the moon hidden beyond the thick canopy is quite the opposite, teeming with life, the kind I'm sure both of us find more palatable. The moon? Somehow, the Emperor sent him to the wrong planet? No, appearing on an uninhabited death world and on the highly populated moon filled with civilians were starkly different. One would allow him to strike at a supposed weakness, the other allowed him to strike up a dialogue, since his mere existence wasn't a naked threat to the civilians she likely wanted to protect. So you want me to talk? No, to listen? Is that it, Father? The lion mused, his eyes following every twitch of a muscle in his opponent's body. Then his eyes widened ever so slightly. The body was real now, no longer an illusion. The change had been so seamless, the preceding illusion so realistic, that it took him a second to catch on to the change. Rewinding his memories, he couldn't for the life of him pinpoint the moment it happened. A show of trust. Just like his sheathing of his blade. Perhaps foolish, since he was of the mind that her primary advantage over him was that he couldn't find and kill her if she kept conversing through illusions conjured up from far away. But she did not seem foolish. Quite the opposite. Did that mean that her illusion being replaced by the real body was much less of a vulnerability than he had assumed? If it's even her real body. He thought, eyes narrowing. She has the artifact. She made a clone of Fulgrim in seconds, so it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibilities that she had a whole army of clone bodies she could control from afar, or jump into when slain. If that were true, she might just be too annoying to kill. Perhaps impossible on his lonesome. Unless she was weakened by losing a body, or it took her a while to jump between them, she could easily make hunting all bodies down impossible. And he wasn't even taking into account the fact that the moon orbiting this planet was likely where her base of operations was. He had only a power armor, his sword, his shield, and some basic tools needed for hunting and survival. He had no way of getting up there, not if his father didn't guide him through the shadowy brambles again, which the lion doubted he would. Even just entering his forest walking felt like it would strain him. The shadow was heavy in this system, almost stifling even for him. A sharp spike of danger pierced his mind, making him stiffen and place his shield between himself and the source. And that is our way off this murderous green ball of death, the woman said, glancing at him. His eyes caught a flicker of amusement in her eyes, her lips quirking upwards just the slightest bit, then it was gone, leaving behind a professional smile. Through this gate is one of my cities. I think taking a walk through it should be a good start towards allaying your doubts. He glanced at the gate, at the wound in reality. It was a portal, similar to the ones the Eldar used, but rawer. Those Xeno split reality, peeling back the threads to open a gateway. However, the thing before him felt more like a hole torn open, though not by an amateur. If he had to put it into words, it felt like the woman just didn't want to bother doing it the elegant way, when she had the power to do it by applying the appropriate amount of brute force. A portal? He questioned, peering through. On the other side, he saw an empty room, furnished like a luxurious lounge. He didn't move to go through. Not trusting the strange gap in reality not to dump you in the warp? The woman asked, smiling. Rightly so, I doubt I would jump through a portal made by anyone I didn't trust. It's far too easy to just disconnect it and deliver the hapless traveler to a demonic banquet. The alternative is going the old-school way though, and that would take too long, we wouldn't even get there before the hour was up. Wouldn't words suffice? The lion asked. I asked you to convince me. Seeing is believing, she said, shrugging. My words would hold little weight without seeing the visual proof before your eyes. Father wouldn't have led me here if this were a trap. The lion reasoned, becoming more and more convinced that his father wanted the strange psyker as an ally, not dead. The Emperor had always had foresight beyond mortal comprehension. Or perhaps I am supposed to believe that until she reveals her true colors. Without another word, he stepped through the shimmering portal, making sure not to touch the burning edge where reality itself was seemingly smoldering from the strain. A dozen alerts popped up in his armor at once, but nothing dangerous. The air was thinner, less humid, but breathable. The gravity was also dimmer, but it was still fit for human habitation. A moment later, the psyker, Echidna, stepped through behind him, and the portal hissed shut behind her. Welcome to my little slice of the galaxy, she said, striding towards a shut double door that she sent flying open with a flick of her wrist. It's only a single moon, with little over 50 million human inhabitants, but it's mine and as of now, one of the safest places to live in the galaxy. That's a tall claim, the lion rumbled, stepping out onto the balcony beside her. His eyes roamed over the scenery, over the towering buildings reaching for the sky, all pristine and looking freshly built. I doubt a single moon could be more well defended than Terra itself. Ah, but you misunderstand, Echidna said, a smirk playing on her lips as she turned to him. Or perhaps we just have different definitions of safe. They don't have to fear starvation, homelessness, or criminals. There is no organized crime, no nobles who can kill citizens on a whim, no cults preying on the unfortunate, no factories that work people to death. With the shadow in place, chaos can't reach this system. Sure, the citizens of Terra might not have to fear alien invasions, but they have plenty of other things to fear. Just a few years ago, a Cornite invasion slaughtered millions, only getting stopped on the steps of the imperial palace. Though the machinations of nobles, starvation, and disease likely claim more lives on Terra every single day than that invasion did in its entirety. The lion had no counter to that. He could only feel a morose longing for the Terra that was lost, the Terra he knew and the one his father wanted to create. The one Rogel wanted to rebuild to be beautiful, self-sustaining and livable to its people. The one that would never be. He wanted to deny her words as lies. He had not seen what had become of Terra with his own eyes, but he had seen what the Imperium had turned into in his absence. Terra had always been the beating heart of the Imperium, and when the body was so rotten, the heart, the very center of it all, must have been worse than his most pessimistic conjectures. His eyes traveled up, towards the sky that was fake? Yes. It looked real enough, but there was no depth to it, and he could see it curved downwards far too close for it to be the horizon. We are inside an arcology. I see you noticed the ceiling, Echidna said. Kind of like a hive city, or what a hive city was supposed to be. If I recall correctly, those horrid things were built based on half-finished designs from the age of technology. I'd like to imagine this would be similar to what the original designers pictured as their end goal, but realistically, it's still in need of refinement. It beats hive cities, though. How? The lion asked, playing along with the song and dance. Though he was somewhat interested, he was much more interested in the pride the woman was radiating as she talked. The air filtration systems for one, she said, taking a deep breath with a smile on her face. No smog, no pollution. The air is as fresh and rich as in the depths of a jungle. Living space is abundant, electricity and freshwater are available to all. There is no undercity infested with cults and mutants either, living in a permanent darkness and surviving on garbage. Where do you get the resources for this? He asked. He was no builder like Rogel, or a master of logistics like Gilliman, but he knew strategy, and he knew wars couldn't be fought without supply lines. Likewise, a city couldn't be built out of hope and thin air. It needed workers, materials, know-how, and organization. This nifty little artifact, those dreary shadow keepers would have been happy to keep locked up in a vault till the end of time, has many uses, she said, waving her fingers on an outstretched hand, causing them to transform into longer white tendrils for a moment before returning to their original form. I can turn a dead, diseased rat into a dinner fit for kings with a snap of my fingers, with this thing helping me. All I need is a source of biomass, and I can make anything, and it just so happens that this moon had an orc infestation, which supplies me with an abundance of biomass. More than I know what to do with, really. You are farming orcs? The lion asked, a hint of bewilderment seeping into his tone. He didn't know whether to be impressed or disgusted. Was she a moron or just inspired? It all depends on whether she can keep the infestation from boiling over. He decided, even though he was of the mind that the only good orc was a dead orc. They were a menace, an infestation that, if left unchecked, tended to spiral out of control and devour all that it could. In a sense, Echidna said, nodding. It's not like I have to even encourage them to slaughter each other. They do that by themselves, and that leaves me with plenty of easy-to-harvest, high-yield corpses. Orcs are much thicker in biomass than humans are, so a single one is worth dozens of human corpses. I can make a skyscraper like the one we are standing on out of a few thousand dead orcs. She built the buildings out of biomass? The lion thought, his thoughts tinged with disbelief. He never knew the artifact was capable of such a thing. He had been led to believe it was made for precise genetic engineering, and to mold flesh like clay. I suppose that is what she's doing, but this is beyond anything I thought the artifact was capable of. There was a difference between turning regular humans into unique masterpieces built for war. The emperor took hours to build each of his custodians with the artifact. Yes, it was impressive, but it was not single-handedly building a hive city level impressive. The scale of it was just on another level. But a hive city can't fight on the level of a custodian. He thought. There is a reason each of them is considered to be worth as much as a planet. Father had quality, but she has quantity and scale. He also had to admit that to the regular people, having an arcology likely made their lives much better, while having a custodian breathe down their necks would at best provide protection from violent harm. Well then, the lion said, his thoughts still lingering in the past. Lead the way. You promised a tour? I did, didn't I? She smiled. Sure. Let's go then, though I'll put an illusion on you, if you don't mind. A 10-foot-tall super soldier covered in power armor might make people a bit afraid. No need to scare them needlessly. The lion nodded, and the woman waved her hand. He saw no change, but she merely gestured to a standing mirror to the side. A tiny, 6-foot-tall elderly human with a rough copy of his face stared back at him. He looked unassuming and frail, the type of man that would get lost in a crowd were it not for the steel in his eyes. He did not like the image, his mood souring at the sight of the frail old man in the mirror. She was playing with him, knowing he loathed the fact that old age was starting to weigh him down. She wants me to accept the rejuvenation treatment. He thought darkly, but suppressed his annoyance. If he could trust her, he would have accepted, but therein lay the problem. He couldn't trust her, and it wasn't just stubbornness on his part either. He was one of only 2 primarchs. The only 2 beings in the galaxy who might still save humanity. He could not risk subjecting himself to a treatment he couldn't control, one that might change him in unexpected ways. He knew that artifact, if he gave her the opportunity, she could just as easily turn his entire body into a slurry as she could return his youth to him. Too dangerous. Too risky. Not worth it. It would be downright irresponsible to take that risk. His age was not such a massive problem yet, he could still fight, his mind was still sharp. He was not desperate enough to take risks this great. Not yet. Preferably never. Lead the way, the lion said, and frowned at the much frilier voice that left his mouth. When he turned back to her, she too had put on a disguise. Her hair turned brown, and her eyes lost their gem-like luster. Come on then, she said, gesturing for him to follow as she led him out of the lounge. I think we'll start with a short walk down the street, then head down to the greenhouses on the lower levels before checking out the residential levels.